Hey guys. Tonight's story starts with a noise you don't want to identify. A priest sprinting like he's late to his own funeral, and a rooster that refuses to comment. The village wakes up slow, suspicious, and already halfway to madness. By midday, people are waving garlic like weapons, rats are holding family meetings in your pantry, and a man in a bird mask claims he's here to help. You're not sure if he's a doctor or a new species. Either way, you let him in. But before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. And drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. The bell rings once, sharp and uncertain, like it's not entirely sure if it should. Then again, louder, longer. You jolt upright, blankets tangled around your legs, heart thudding like it's trying to flee before you do. The air feels heavy, thick with wood smoke and something else, unease maybe, or the smell of onions left too close to the fire. Outside, a rooster stares at the rising sun and pointedly says nothing. He's been reliable every morning for 3 years, but today he's quiet. And somehow that's worse than if he'd screamed. Bells don't ring at dawn unless someone's died. Or unless someone very much wants everyone to think they have. You throw on yesterday's tunic, which smells faintly of sheep and last night's ale, and push open the door. The village is waking the way a drunk wakes from a bad dream, slowly, suspiciously, and already complaining. Smoke drifts from a handful of chimneys. The baker's boy stands in the lane, flour in his hair, staring toward the church tower as if it might start explaining itself. Old Marga, wrapped in more shawls than logic, mutters, "It's begun," which is something she says every spring when the geese return, so no one pays her much attention. But this time, there's a tremor in her voice. The word slides through the air like a curse. Plague. You've heard it before, of course. Whispers from travelers passing through. Tales of villages to the south emptied overnight, of carts carrying more silence than goods. You'd laughed then, because laughing is easier than thinking, and besides, that sort of thing doesn't happen here. Not to your quiet little cluster of mud and timber. But the bell keeps tolling, and no one's laughing now. The smith leans on his hammer, staring toward the chapel as if he could forge the truth out of thin air. The miller's wife clutches her youngest to her chest like she's expecting the air to snatch him away. Even the dogs seem confused, circling and whining, noses twitching at something invisible. The only one moving with purpose is Father Aldwin, robes flapping like sails, running toward the square with the sort of determination only faith or sheer panic can provide. You follow the sound, because that's what everyone does. The square gathers itself together piece by piece. The baker still dusted with dough, the shepherd with hay in his hair, the children clutching at their mother's skirts. The bell falls silent, and for a heartbeat the world holds its breath. Then the priest clears his throat. "A sickness," he says. The word lands heavy. "In the next valley," someone gasps. Someone else swears. "We must pray," he continues, but he's gripping the cross around his neck so tightly his knuckles whiten. Prayer feels flimsy, like patching a hole in a roof with good intentions. You glance toward the apothecary's hut, where a curtain stirs but no one steps out. Rumor says her husband's been coughing for days. You remember the sound faintly through the night, wet, dragging, wrong. You tell yourself it was just the wind. The wind, unfortunately, doesn't usually wheeze. A crow lands on the well's edge and lets out a single, sharp caw that makes half the crowd flinch. It eyes you all like it's already making a list. You can almost hear it thinking, one by one. Father Aldwin starts praying aloud, his voice trembling, the Latin mangled into something that sounds like a recipe shouted underwater. People kneel. You don't. Not because you're brave, but because your knees ache and you're still trying to decide whether divine favor or distance is the better defense. A woman starts crying softly. A man mutters that he's seen this before, in the East, and that it doesn't stop. The baker whispers about closing the road, as if pestilence will politely wait at the gate until invited in. You half expect the bell to start again, but the silence stretches instead, growing fat and uncomfortable. The rooster finally lets out a half-hearted crow that sounds more like a question than a greeting. You think about packing, about leaving before anyone notices you're gone. But where would you go? The next village? The next one after that? Every direction leads somewhere people are already dying. The thought feels like cold water poured down your spine. You look around at faces you've known your whole life, faces that now avoid each other's eyes. The butcher coughs once, quickly, into his sleeve, and every head turns. He laughs, thin and false. Just the dust, he says. No one believes him. By midday, the bell is still. Smoke rises from half the hearths, and the other half stay dark. Children are called inside. Doors close. The square empties until it's only you, the priest, and the crow, still perched on the well. You watch it tilt its head, watching you back. The air hums with something you can't name. It smells like ash and endings. The priest makes the sign of the cross, muttering about faith and fortitude. You think about bread and firewood and how far a man could walk before sunset. The rooster crows again, a little stronger this time, as if mocking your hesitation. You turn toward home, the bell's echo still trapped in your chest, and realize the day has already changed shape. It looks the same, but it isn't. Something invisible has stepped into the village, and it's not planning to leave. The morning looks almost normal, which feels suspicious. The sun climbs lazily over the hills, spilling its light, like it's not sure the village deserves it. You step outside and the mud greets you with its usual damp enthusiasm, clinging to your boots as if it senses you might try to run away. The baker is already shouting at someone, which is comforting in a strange way. The world, it seems, hasn't ended yet, it's just wheezing a little. You hear someone cough in the distance, then another, closer, and you tell yourself it's just the cold air. Everyone does. The whole village has suddenly developed the weather. Smoke curls from crooked chimneys. The smell of bread mixes with something sourer, something you don't want to name. The baker's boy trips over the same bucket he trips over every morning, and a few people even laugh, though the laughter sounds thinner now, like it's trying too hard. Down the lane, old Marga waves incense made from time and superstition, muttering about keeping the evil air at bay. Her cat follows, glaring at anyone who looks too alive. You give her a polite nod, hold your breath as you pass, and then realize you're doing it for real now, holding your breath in public, just in case breathing has become dangerous. A group of villagers stands near the well, talking too quietly to be innocent. You catch words like coughing and spots. You decide they're probably discussing weather patterns again, because the alternative means it's already here. Father Aldwin passes by, clutching a bucket of water like it's holy. He gives a reassuring smile, but it twitches at the edges, and the sweat on his forehead says faith may be struggling against facts. He blesses a passing chicken for no apparent reason. The chicken looks unimpressed. By the forge, the blacksmith hammers metal with unnecessary force, as if volume can keep sickness away. Sparks fly, and he mutters to himself between strikes. You pretend to admire his work, mostly because standing still feels safer than thinking. A young woman hurries by with her shawl pulled over her mouth. You can't tell if she's hiding from the wind or the world. She nods once and keeps walking. No one greets anyone for long anymore. Conversations have become brief. Efficient words are starting to feel contagious too. You head toward the bakery, because even impending doom can't stop hunger. Inside, the air is thick with flour and denial. The baker grumbles that business is slow, but you notice half the loaves untouched. each one looking a little lonelier than yesterday. He slides you a hunk of bread wrapped in cloth and mutters, "Eat while it's still safe." You don't ask what he means. You don't want to know. Outside again, you chew slowly, staring at the rooftops. A crow lands on the church spire and lets out a caw that sounds like mockery. Someone sneezes behind you. The world pauses. Then everyone pretends not to have heard it, as if ignoring sound can erase it. You take another bite, force a smile, and start humming a tune that doesn't sound nearly as cheerful as you remember. The mud squelches. The bells stay silent. The air feels thick enough to bite, and you tell yourself, again, that it's just the weather. You tell yourself the human body is mysterious, and that mysterious does not always mean terminal. The priest said, "Faith is stronger than fear," though you notice he now prays from the doorway instead of inside the chapel. You decide it's fine. Everyone decides it's fine. You've developed a small red bump on your arm, but that could be anything. Maybe an insect bite. Maybe divine punishment for skipping confession 3 weeks in a row. Definitely not the thing that makes men drop dead in the street. You scratch it once, feel it swell, and decide scratching invites demons. You fold your arms and hum to distract yourself from your own mortality. The apothecary's hut smells like vinegar and despair. You duck inside anyway because denial is easier with a professional opinion, even a questionable one. The old woman squints at your arm through a fog of steam and herbs. "It's nothing," you say brightly. "Just a rash." She nods slowly, the way people do when they're sure it's something but don't want to say it out loud. "Eat garlic," she says. You tell her you already have, and she adds, "More garlic." You buy a bundle anyway, partly for health, partly because it gives your hands something to do other than shake. Back home, you hang the garlic over the door and stuff cloves into every pocket. You feel like a walking seasoning, but that's fine. People wave from a distance, which you take as politeness, not concern. The blacksmith coughs twice, and you pretend you didn't hear. The baker's boy has stopped delivering bread to houses. Now he just leaves it in the middle of the street and shouts your name from afar. You call this efficient. He calls it precaution. The truth hides somewhere in the gap between the two. You start attending church more often, because if the plague is real, you want witnesses to how pious you've suddenly become. Father Aldwin has placed bowls of holy water at every entrance, and everyone dunks their hands with the conviction of people who believe sanctified germs can't hurt them. You notice the priest himself doesn't touch the water anymore, just waves at it like an acquaintance he'd rather not hug. You wash your hands anyway, twice for good measure, then whisper a prayer to the Virgin and to anyone else who might be listening. It's probably fine. Faith is half the cure, you decide, and ignorance is the other half. At the well, people gossip softly about the next village. You listen without listening. Someone says the miller's wife there turned black overnight. Someone else insists she's alive and baking again, though no one's seen her. Probably just a rumor, you say, too quickly. You smile, too wide. A neighbor stares at you, eyes flicking to the red bump on your arm. You cross your arms again, casually, as though blocking sunlight instead of suspicion. Night brings quiet, but not peace. You sit by the fire, chewing another clove of garlic, until your tongue protests. The smoke curls upward in lazy shapes that look almost human, and you think of all the people who swore it wouldn't come here. You picture them saying it again, only softer, from their beds. You pull your blanket tighter, sniff the faint sweetness of rot in the wind, and convince yourself it's just the river, just the air, just your imagination. You glance at your arm one last time. The rash glistens in the firelight, round and defiant. "It's fine," you say aloud. "Completely fine." The rash, of course, says nothing. It doesn't have to. You've become something of an expert in observation, though not by choice. These days, it's a public duty to watch your neighbors for signs of doom. You do it under the pretense of friendliness, nodding as they pass, eyes scanning for the telltale glint of sweat on a pale forehead, the twitch of a cough smothered too quickly. The line between curiosity and paranoia has blurred beyond recognition, and you take mental notes like a scholar of misfortune. Buboes, fevers, suspicious sneezing, your village's unofficial field guide to impending tragedy. At first, the signs are subtle. Tomas the miller starts wearing his scarf indoors, claiming a draft from the river. His cheeks look gray, but you tell yourself he's just tired. Then there's Edith, who used to laugh loud enough to startle pigeons. Now she barely lifts her eyes when someone greets her. Her hands tremble as she draws water, and you notice her sleeves sit lower on her wrists than usual. She says it's fashion. You nod. Everyone's very fashionable lately. The baker coughs into the dough and insists it's the flour's fault. He said that before, but the customers start taking their bread to go, wrapped carefully, touched only at the corners. Even the dog outside keeps his distance, which feels like divine wisdom in animal form. The market buzzes with whispered updates. Whose cousin's cousin fell ill, which farm smells strange, who's burying things behind their house at night. You pretend not to listen while listening to every word. One afternoon, you catch your reflection in a bucket of water and find yourself studying your own neck for swelling. Nothing, you think, relieved and insulted all at once. Across the lane, Marga the herb seller watches you from her doorway, shaking her head slowly. Looking for trouble, she mutters, clutching her rosary. You wave and smile, as if that might keep you on the safe side of her suspicion. There's an art to pretending everything is fine while secretly cataloging the apocalypse. You practice it daily. You chat about the weather, but your eyes dart to the color of someone's lips. You ask after their family, but really, you're listening for the rasp in their breathing. When someone laughs too hard, you flinch. When they don't laugh at all, you flinch again. You start dreaming in symptoms: heat, boils, the sound of wheezing. You wake to the sound of your own breath, checking that it still sounds ordinary. By evening, the village feels like a stage play where everyone's trying to remember their lines. The tavern is quieter, the priest prays longer, and the smith hammers until dark, as though noise alone could scare off disease. You pass your neighbors and smile too wide, too bright, hoping they don't notice the way your eyes linger on their throats, their hands, the edges of their sleeves. When you see the baker's boy rubbing at a bruise on his neck, you look away quickly, pretending you didn't. It becomes a ritual. Look, assess, deny. You tell yourself you're being cautious, not cruel. Still, when someone disappears for a few days, you avoid asking where they've gone. You already know. The streets grow emptier, the bells ring more often, and you begin to think you can hear the sickness moving slow, deliberate, almost polite. You check your own pulse before bed, count to 10, and whisper, "Not today." Then you blow out the candle and dream of healthy faces, though you can't quite remember what those looked like anymore. The healer's hut leans like it's tired of pretending to be straight. The roof droops, the door sticks, and the smell that seeps from inside could strip paint if paint had been invented yet. You stand outside for a moment, considering whether you actually want to live badly enough to go in. The air hums with the scent of boiled herbs, smoke, and faint despair. A crow cackles from the roof beam, which feels like a review. You knock anyway, because the red lump on your arm has started to look like it's plotting something. The healer greets you with the enthusiasm of a man who hasn't slept since the last rain. His beard is uneven, his tunic stained in ways that suggest experimentation, and his table is a battlefield of jars filled with liquids in every shade of suspicious. "Ah," he says, eyeing your arm, "your humors are misbehaving." You're impressed he can tell that from 10 paces. "I've seen this before," he adds, though his tone implies he might be lying. You mention the word plague, and he waves a dismissive hand. "No, no, nonsense. Merely an excess of melancholy. Or bile, or both. Hard to say without bleeding you first." He rummages through a pile of bottles, muttering the way a man mutters when trying to remember which potion kills and which one just makes you dizzy. Finally, he lifts a jar of leeches with the reverence of a priest holding relics. They slither against the glass, sleek and shiny, little apostles of bad science. "Good strong leeches," he says proudly, "from the river. They thrive near corpses, you know. Means they're hardy." You try to smile. "Do I need?" You begin, but he's already rolling up your sleeve. "Everyone needs leeches," he declares. You sit in the flickering light, trying not to think about how one of them has attached itself with alarming enthusiasm. The healer hums a tuneless melody as he stirs something bubbling on the fire. "This tonic will balance your humors," he says, handing you a cup that smells like boiled feet and regret. You take a cautious sip and immediately wonder if your soul just left your body for cleaner air. He nods approvingly. That means it's working. You glance around the hut. Dried herbs hang from the rafters like shriveled hopes. A dusty skull sits on a shelf, grinning as though it knows how this ends. You spot a ledger full of names crossed out in thick ink and decide not to ask about it. The healer leans close and whispers, "Sleep with an onion under your pillow tonight. It draws out the sickness." You ask if that's proven, and he smiles as if you've said something adorable. "Proven? My dear, the onion has never complained." When he's done, he pats your shoulder, leaving a faint handprint of something you hope is soot. "You'll be right as rain in 3 days, he assures you, which sounds less comforting when you remember rain is usually gray and miserable. You pay him in coins and gratitude, both of which he accepts as though neither has much value. Outside, the air feels cleaner, even though it probably isn't. The leeches wriggle contentedly in a cloth pouch he insisted you take home for maintenance. You walk back through the village, reeking faintly of garlic, vinegar, and misplaced confidence. People nod as you pass, their eyes flicking to your arm and then away again. The crow follows you from rooftop to rooftop, cawing like it's taking notes. You tell yourself you feel better already. The healer said 3 days. You decide to believe him, because disbelief would require an alternative. The morning begins with bells again, but not the slow, mourning kind that toll for the dead. These ring fast and wild, like they're trying to wake God himself. You follow the sound to the church square where half the village has gathered barefoot in the mud, muttering prayers through cracked lips. The air smells of incense, sweat, and wet wool. Father Aldwin stands on the church steps shouting that salvation requires sincerity, and sincerity apparently requires volume. You join the crowd because no one wants to be the one who isn't begging for forgiveness right now. The chant rises and falls like waves, 100 voices calling on saints whose names you suddenly realize you've never learned. A few people are already crying, which feels like extra credit. You mouth the words, trying to look appropriately penitent, but your mind keeps drifting to smaller sins. You think about that one time you stole a turnip from the miller's cart, about how you swore it was for charity, when really you were just hungry. You consider repenting for it now, but then again, there's a plague outside, surely that counts as penance. The priest moves among the people, tapping heads with a wooden cross like he's testing melons at market. When it's your turn, he squints at you. "Have you examined your soul?" he asks. You nod, though the examination mostly consisted of trying to remember the 10 commandments in order. He tells you to fast for 3 days and sleep on straw. You wonder if that's holiness or just budgeting. Behind you, a woman wails that her husband's boils are proof of divine punishment. Someone else shouts that the Lord has chosen to cleanse the world. You glance around and see that nearly everyone looks exhausted, gaunt, their faith stretched thin like old cloth. Yet there's a strange comfort in it. Misery looks less frightening when everyone shares it. You kneel in the mud and pray half-heartedly, mostly for warmth and maybe an end to the smell. The church doors swing open, and inside you catch a glimpse of candles burning in thick clusters, their wax puddling into a single glowing mass. The air inside is thick with incense smoke and whispers. The floorboards creak with every shuffle of feet. Someone begins singing, voice trembling but beautiful, a hymn about mercy that doesn't seem to reach the ceiling. You join in on the second verse because silence feels dangerous. As the day goes on, the crowd begins to move as one, a slow procession through the village streets. People beat their chests, drag their feet, and mutter confessions to no one in particular. You follow along, partly because leaving would look suspicious, partly because the rhythm of it dulls your fear. The priest shouts that the Lord watches every heart. You think that's unfortunate, considering the state of yours. When dusk comes, the torches are lit, turning the procession into a flickering line of smoke and shadows. The mud squelches underfoot, the chant grows hoarse, and your stomach growls like an unrepentant demon. You tell yourself faith should outweigh hunger, though the garlic from yesterday's cure still sits heavy in your gut. Father Aldwin ends the prayers by declaring that the righteous will be spared. You try to believe him, even as the sound of distant coughing answers like an echo. Back home, you scrape the mud from your feet and collapse onto your bed of straw. The candles flicker weakly, and for a moment, the silence feels like peace. You whisper one last prayer, small and clumsy, asking not for forgiveness, but for tomorrow. Then you listen to the night and the wind moving through the empty streets, and you wonder if heaven ever hears things this quiet. You hang a bundle of herbs over your door like a charm against reason. Rosemary, sage, and something that might be parsley if you squint, tied together with red twine, because everyone insists red confuses the plague. You're not sure if that's science or rumor, but in a time when both are equally useless, you choose style. The smoke from the hearth curls lazily through the room, and you tell yourself it's cozy, not suffocating. Outside, the village square is quiet, punctuated only by distant coughing and the occasional sound of a chicken that hasn't realized society is collapsing. You decide to stay indoors for a while. The healer called it self-isolation, which you think sounds far nobler than hiding. You push a bench against the door not to block anyone, just to lean on it for safety, and set about creating your new life of solitude. The cat, who has never liked people anyway, approves immediately. The rooster looks at you through the window, confused that you're not out fetching water, then goes back to pecking dirt, as though apocalypse or not, breakfast comes first. You light a few more candles, mostly for atmosphere. The shadows dance across the walls, turning every corner into a maybe. You wash your hands again in vinegar, just to feel like you're doing something, then pace the floorboards until you realize they creak in a way that could drive a monk to drink. You listen for footsteps outside. None come. Good. People, at the moment, are suspicious objects, warm, breathing, and potentially fatal. The village calls it quarantine. You call it introversion. Finally, an excuse not to attend the evening prayer circle where everyone pretends they're not terrified. You brew yourself a cup of something that smells like liquid punishment, garlic, onion, and boiled wine, and convince yourself it tastes medicinal. It doesn't. You drink it anyway, because comfort has become a luxury item. Every so often, a neighbor passes by your window, waving cautiously with a bundle of herbs pressed to their nose. You wave back from a safe distance, both of you pretending the distance is polite, not necessary. Old Marga shuffles past, muttering that no one should speak above a whisper or death will find its way through the cracks. You whisper back, "Good morning," and she scowls, as if you've just invited catastrophe to tea. Days begin to blur into a rhythm. You count them by candle stubs and the number of times you've reorganized your cupboard. You discover that silence has its own personality, fickle, occasionally loud. You talk to the cat. The cat doesn't answer, which you take as wisdom. Sometimes, when the wind shifts, you hear the church bells toll for someone else, and you stop breathing for a moment, waiting to see if it was anyone you knew. Usually, it is. By evening, you crack the window for air and watch the village through the haze. A few people move like ghosts between doorways, careful not to linger. The smell of burning herbs and damp soil mixes with the fading light. You pull the bench tighter against the door and tell yourself you're safe for tonight. The cat curls up at your feet. The rooster calls once from somewhere far off, late and lazy. You smile into the candlelight and whisper that tomorrow you might even open the window all the way, but probably not. The village smells like a stew gone wrong. Smoke, herbs, sweat, and the faint sharpness of desperation mingle in the air until it's hard to tell what's meant to heal and what's meant to hide. Everyone's burning something: rosemary, thyme, juniper, their neighbor's patience, and the streets shimmer with haze thick enough to chew. You can barely step outside without feeling like you've wandered into a communal experiment in bad ideas. The healer claims the smoke purifies the air, but judging by the way your eyes water and your lungs protest, you suspect it's just making everyone's suffering more aromatic. You join in, of course. To refuse would be suspicious, and suspicion these days is as dangerous as disease. You pile herbs in a small pot by your door, adding an onion for good measure because the apothecary swore it draws out the plague. You don't know if she meant from the body or the air, but you're not about to split hairs. The smell is immediate and offensive, like a kitchen crime witnessed by God himself. Still, you fan the smoke dutifully toward the windows and call it protection. The cat sneezes twice and leaves the room, disgusted by your survival instincts. Outside, the village smolders. Every home sends up its own peculiar incense. One reeks of sage and soot, another of vinegar and burnt garlic. The result is a patchwork fog of culinary horror. The baker has taken to tossing handfuls of flour into his hearth to thicken the air, which only makes the lane smell like toasted despair. Old Marga's hut produces a steady column of smoke that smells like boiled cabbage and repentance. She claims to be communing with saints. Everyone else claims she's cooking them. By midday, your clothes have absorbed so much odor you might as well declare yourself cured or condemned. It's hard to tell which. The smoke sticks to your hair, your skin, your soul. You catch sight of your reflection in a bucket of water and think you look like someone halfway between a monk and a roast. Still, you persist, adding more herbs every hour as though fighting the plague through sheer olfactory offense. The air hums with it, thick and buzzing. Down the lane, the priest walks with a censer so large it could fumigate a cathedral. Faith cleanses, he calls, though his eyes are red and streaming. Behind him, a trail of coughing believers follow like incense-addled ghosts. You wave politely from your doorway, unwilling to risk joining a crowd that smells even worse than yours. A few of them carry burning torches wrapped with rosemary and yarrow, swinging them like weapons. You think the flames look hopeful, even if the hope smells like soup left too long by the fire. As evening falls, the smoke settles low, curling through the alleys and fields like a living thing. The sun dips behind the hills, its light turned amber by the haze. You watch it fade through your doorway, half blinded, half dazed, surrounded by the perfume of collective panic. Somewhere, a child asks why the air hurts, and no one answers. The cat returns, squints at you, then curls up near the hearth, as if admitting this might be as safe as it gets. You sit by your pot of smoldering herbs, stirring it occasionally to prove to yourself you're still doing something. The smell has become so constant that you can't remember what clean air ever felt like. You close your eyes and breathe through the smoke, each inhale a gamble. Maybe it's working, maybe it's not. But as the village fades into a haze of faith and fumes, one thing is certain. If death finds you tonight, it'll have to hold its nose. The first thing you notice when you step outside is that everyone has lost their minds in remarkably inventive ways. The street looks like a festival organized by people who have never met sanity. Marta, the weaver, is wearing a wooden bucket on her head with 2 small holes cut for vision. She claims it keeps out bad air, though it also keeps out most sunlight and conversation. You watch her bump into the same fence post twice before deciding she might be onto something ignorance. After all, seems wonderfully protective. Across the lane, Old Roderick has abandoned his cottage entirely and moved into his goat shed for the airflow. He swears the lane, goat's breath is cleaner than the village's, and judging by the way the streets smell these days, you can't argue. You peek inside as you pass and see him sitting proudly among his herd, chewing a bit of straw and humming like a man who's cracked the code of life. One of the goats sneezes, and he shouts, "Bless you," with such sincerity you almost envy his optimism. Further down, two young men have taken to wearing wreaths of onions around their necks, like medieval saints of poor decisions. They swagger through the square, smelling of soup and salvation. "Keeps the sickness away," they declare, though no one gets close enough to test the theory. You make a mental note that isolation might come naturally if you simply offend everyone's nose. At the well, a small crowd debates whether painting the doorframes blue will trick death into thinking the house is already taken. A few have gone so far as to smear clay on their walls and carve protective runes shaped suspiciously like chickens. Someone insists you must whistle when you do it to scare the demons. You consider trying it, but realize your neighbors already think you're odd enough for talking to your cat. Even the priest seems to be participating in the madness. He's taken to sprinkling holy water from a distance using a broom, shouting blessings like battle cries. The healer now walks the streets wearing gloves so thick she can barely hold her basket. She waves to you awkwardly, a bundle of herbs tied around her neck like a perfumed collar. You wave back with a polite smile and quietly calculate how long before you join them in whatever this is. By afternoon, the air hums with invention and smoke. Every household has found a new ritual, each one stranger than the last. Some hang fish scales from their windows to distract the plague. Others leave loaves of bread on their steps for wandering saints who never arrive. You watch, amused and uneasy, as the absurdity piles higher than the church spire. The bucket lady bumps into your fence again, mutters an apology to the wood, and keeps walking. That night, you sit by your own door, the bundle of herbs still smoldering faintly above it. You stare at the goat shed glowing faintly in the moonlight, listen to the chanting, and wonder if the madness isn't part of the cure. Maybe belief itself keeps people breathing belief in onions, in buckets, in any nonsense that gives the illusion of control. You pour yourself a cup of watered wine, raise it toward the smoky sky, and toast to human creativity, which seems to thrive best when logic takes the night off. You decide to bathe because your skin feels like it's wearing a second, slightly stickier layer of itself. It seems sensible enough water cleans, doesn't it? But the moment the first splash hits your shoulders, you hear it. The sharp gasp of your neighbor outside, followed by the horrified clatter of a dropped bucket. Within minutes, 3 people are at your door, demanding to know what unholy business you've begun. You assure them it's just a wash, but they look at you like you've declared war on your own flesh. Everyone knows water spreads the sickness, they remind you. Bathing opens the pores, they say, and that's where death sneaks in. You nod along politely, dripping guilt onto the floor. The baker's wife crosses herself and mutters about fools who tempt fate. You tell her you used boiled water, which only makes things worse apparently. Hot water makes the devil curious. You promise never to do it again. Towel yourself off in shame and pray the steam doesn't give you away. The water, to its credit, feels miraculous. For a brief moment, you remember what clean skin is supposed to feel like, the cool touch against the grime that has become part of your personality. But the guilt grows heavier than the dirt ever was. You scrub quickly, as if caught in a crime, and dump the bathwater into the yard before anyone can accuse you of witchcraft. The earth hisses when it touches the ground, which feels like an omen. By midday, word has spread. A small crowd gathers by your gate, pretending to discuss grain prices but clearly staring at your damp hair. You overhear someone say, "He bathed willingly." Another whispers, "He'll be gone by dawn." You consider defending yourself, then realize nothing you say will outshine the spectacle of your alleged self-cleansing. The blacksmith shakes his head sadly, as if mourning your inevitable demise. You wave, smile weakly, and retreat inside before they start throwing salt at you. The cat refuses to come near you, possibly offended by the lack of familiar odors. Even your blanket feels judgmental. You open the window for air and immediately regret it outside. The village smells like onions, smoke, and despair. You close it again and wonder if dirt was the only thing protecting you after all. Maybe grime is armor. Maybe stink is a blessing. The thought feels strangely comforting. By evening, you're dry enough to pretend nothing happened. You rub a little ash on your wrists for good measure and sit by the fire, hoping the universe has forgiven your moment of hygiene. The bell tolls somewhere in the distance, and for a fleeting second, you're convinced it's for you. You breathe in the scent of smoke and garlic and feel yourself blending back into the landscape of acceptable filth. Tomorrow, no one will remember. They'll find a new heretic to scold a man who sneezed too loudly, a woman who opened a window. You'll nod solemnly when they tell the tale and swear that you, at least, would never risk your life for cleanliness again. And you'll mean it, mostly. He arrives at dawn like a misplaced omen, his silhouette cutting through the fog that never quite leaves the village anymore. You spot him from your window, first tall, cloaked, and crowned with the strangest face you've ever seen. At first, you think it's a bird, walking on two legs, until he tilts his head and the beak catches the light. It gleams, long and curved, stuffed with herbs and mystery. The children run inside at the sight of him. The dogs don't bark. Even the wind holds its breath. By the time he reaches the square, the villagers have gathered in a cautious semicircle. He moves like a ghost wrapped in leather, his boots barely stirring the mud. The mask sniffs faintly with every breath, a soft rasp of air through time and fear. Someone whispers that he's come from the city. Others say from God, though no one specifies which one. You linger near the back, because being near something new feels dangerous, but also impossible to ignore. He introduces himself as a doctor, though his voice sounds like it's being filtered through a tunnel of apothecary smoke. I am here to tend to the afflicted, he declares, and gestures to a small case at his side that clinks with tools and glass. The healer crosses herself. The priest frowns, either jealous or suspicious. The villagers murmur in awe, half believing, half hoping. A brave soul steps forward, sleeve rolled to reveal an arm swollen like rising bread dough. The doctor examines it through the fogged lenses of his mask, nodding gravely, as if the bubo might be impressed by his attention. He pulls out a feather quill dipped in something that smells like vinegar and regret, scratches a few marks in a notebook, then produces a small pouch of herbs. Burn this under your pillow, he says, and breathe deeply. The patient asks if it works. The doctor straightens, adjusts his mask, and says nothing. Then, right on cue, he sneezes into the beak, the sound muffled but unmistakable. A pause follows, long enough for everyone to consider running. He finally nods with solemn authority, as if to confirm that sneezing is part of the treatment. You approach, because curiosity is a disease of its own. Up close, the mask's surface gleams with oil meant to repel miasma, though it mostly repels confidence. You ask if the herbs truly protect him. He gestures to himself and says, "Am I dead?" which isn't quite the answer you wanted. You glance down at his gloves, thick and cracked, and the faint stains on his coat that no amount of incense could hide. Still, he looks alive, and that's a kind of endorsement. By evening, the doctor has disappeared into a house with a sick family. The windows stay closed, and smoke pours from the chimney, carrying the scent of rosemary, wine, and something metallic. The villagers hover nearby, whispering that perhaps this stranger will save them, or at least die trying. You sit on your doorstep and watch the sun dip behind the hills. The wind shifts, bringing the faint smell of burnt sage and illness. Somewhere inside that house, the bird mask man hums softly as he works, like a priest conducting a service no one quite understands. When he emerges at last, the light is gone. He pauses in the street, the curve of his beak gleaming in the moonlight. You ask, Did it help? He tilts his head, as if listening for something beyond the living, then replies, "We shall see." Then he walks away, vanishing into the fog, leaving behind a trail of herbs and unanswered prayers. You whittle the stick yourself, because no craftsman will take a commission that sounds like madness. It's taller than you, and smooth enough not to splinter. A modest investment in self-preservation. When you carry it through the village, people step aside, unsure if you're wise or ridiculous. Maybe both. The world has become a contest between fear and ingenuity, and right now, you're winning by about 3 feet. The first test comes quickly. A neighbor leans out of his window to gossip, his voice thick and cheerful until a cough interrupts. You react on instinct, extending the stick like a knight presenting a lance. "Stay healthy," you shout, though it sounds suspiciously like, "Stay back." He eyes the stick, affronted, but then nods solemnly and shuts the window. Social distancing, 14th century style, seems to work better when everyone's too tired to argue. You grow fond of your invention. It becomes a kind of companion, a walking staff, door knocker, and defensive weapon against proximity. Children whisper that you've gone mad, but they do it from a respectable distance, which you take as a compliment. When the healer approaches with her usual basket of mystery tonics, you hold the stick across your chest like a barrier. She tilts her head, squints, and drops a sachet of herbs at your feet before retreating. "For courage," she calls. You poke the bundle suspiciously, then scoop it up with the stick, because courage is best handled indirectly. At the market, the stick proves indispensable. You use it to point at bread from 2 paces away, to test the ripeness of apples, to prod a suspiciously limp cabbage. The vendors, once offended, now encourage the behavior, relieved to avoid touching coins. You place payment on the end of the stick like an offering, balancing it delicately, while the baker mutters a blessing over both your health and your ridiculousness. It's almost a sport now, precision trade without contact. By afternoon, others have begun adopting variations of your design. You see a shepherd with a crook adapted into a multi-purpose hook, a washerwoman wielding a broom handle wrapped in cloth, even the priest extending his cross with a pole to bless people at arm's length. The village is a forest of sticks by sunset, each one swinging with cautious grace. Somewhere in the distance, someone sneezes, and half a dozen poles immediately lower like drawbridges. At home, you lean your stick by the door and feel strangely proud. The cat sniffs it with disdain, unimpressed by your ingenuity. You boil water for tea, the kind that tastes faintly of dirt and determination, and watch the last light fade behind the thatched roofs. Through the window, silhouettes move with slow, deliberate care, each person armed with their chosen measure of space. You sip, listening to the quiet punctuated by the rhythmic tapping of wood on cobblestone. It sounds almost musical, a strange new harmony of survival. The air is heavy, but for once, it doesn't feel hopeless. You smile, raise your mug toward the door, and think that perhaps distance, in the right hands, can almost feel like control. You first notice them when your bread supply begins to shrink in suspicious increments. At first, you assume you've simply miscounted. Bread tends to evaporate mysteriously when you're anxious, but then you spot the culprit, a small gray shadow darting from the cupboard with all the confidence of a paying tenant. You freeze, loaf in hand, while it pauses to stare back at you, whiskers twitching with what looks disturbingly like mockery. It's not the first rat you've seen this week, but it's the first one that makes you feel like you've lost something larger than food. By nightfall, there's more of them. You hear them skittering behind the walls, tiny claws scratching in rhythm, as if rehearsing for an orchestral debut. You lie in bed staring at the ceiling, counting squeaks instead of sheep, realizing that the soundtrack of your life has gained new percussion. You tell yourself it's fine. Rats are everywhere. They always have been. But when one climbs onto your windowsill at dawn and sits there, bold as a tax collector, cleaning its face while staring straight at you, you realize something has shifted. You are no longer the homeowner, you're the guest. The village pretends not to notice. They're just after scraps, the baker says, though his voice wobbles when a rat scurries past his feet mid-sentence. The healer insists they're part of God's design, though you're fairly sure God didn't intend his creation to gnaw through grain sacks and moral resolve at the same time. Even the priest blesses the infestation from a safe distance, muttering that faith can coexist with rodents, though his eyes say otherwise. Everyone keeps sweeping, sealing, burning herbs, and pretending the scratching noises mean something else. Denial has become a community project. You try diplomacy. You leave crumbs outside the door, a small offering of peace. The next morning, the offering is gone, and so are the onions you'd hidden in the corner. That night, you hear them moving in your pantry, the soft patter of tiny feet, the whisper of tails against wood. You get up, clutching a broom, and find 3 of them staring back at you from the shelf, surrounded by what was once your dinner. The largest one blinks slowly, unimpressed. You wave the broom. It doesn't move. The broom starts to feel like a toy. You back away, closing the door gently as if leaving a private meeting. Within days, the rats begin appearing in daylight. They weave through the streets like citizens on errands, darting between carts, slipping under doorways. A child points and laughs until his mother yanks him inside, eyes wide with superstition. People start storing food in hanging baskets, suspended from beams and prayers. It doesn't help. The rats climb ropes like acrobats, dropping gracefully onto shelves. You watch one drag away a crust of bread twice its size, determined, heroic even. You can't decide whether to applaud or scream. Soon, it becomes clear they're winning. They're in the church, the granary, the healer's hut. The smell of them lingers everywhere, a sharp, earthy scent of inevitability. You catch yourself speaking to them sometimes, muttering threats or bargains while sweeping droppings from the floor. The cat, your supposed defender, has taken to watching them lazily, tail flicking in what can only be described as admiration. You start to suspect an alliance. One night, you hear something heavy fall in the pantry. When you light a candle and step inside, you find a rat perched on your breadboard, nibbling with casual serenity. You shout. It doesn't flinch. You tap the table with your stick, your trusted social distance weapon, but the rat only glances at it before resuming its meal. For a moment, you stand there in silence, both of you framed in the flickering light, 2 survivors simply occupying the same doomed world. You realize then that the rats aren't pests, they're inheritors. They've adapted faster, loved crumbs harder, feared nothing. You, meanwhile, have spent weeks guarding stale loaves and your sanity. You lean on the doorframe and laugh, a quiet sound that surprises even you. The rat pauses, tilts its head, then continues eating as if to say, "Yes, we understand each other now." When you blow out the candle and return to bed, the scratching in the walls sounds almost like applause. You tell yourself you'll set traps tomorrow, but you don't, because deep down, you know the truth. The plague may have taken people, but the rats have taken the world. The tavern smells like hope disguised as smoke. Someone's thrown open the shutters to let in the night air, though it only succeeds in swapping the smell of damp wood for the scent of too many bodies trying not to think about tomorrow. The tables are full, laughter rattling off the walls like coins tossed into a wishing well. The stew on every plate looks the same shade of mystery brownish, with floating bits that could be meat or something meat once looked at. You decide not to ask. Questions have become a luxury, answers a threat. The tavern keeper ladles another portion from the pot, humming a tune that sounds brave but isn't. His wife carries mugs of mead to the tables, sloshing foam onto the floor with the grace of someone who stopped caring about waste 3 weeks ago. You find a spot near the fire, where the warmth feels almost kind, and someone shoves a bowl into your hands before you can refuse. It smells suspiciously edible. Around you, spoons clink against bowls, and for a moment the noise feels normal, ordinary. That illusion alone might be worth dying for. A man at the next table raises his mug. To survival, he says, though no one quite meets his eyes. To stubbornness, someone adds. To not dying today, says another, and that one gets a proper cheer. The mugs clash together in a hollow symphony. You lift yours and drink, the sweetness of honey and ale filling your mouth like something that almost feels like living. The fire pops, and someone starts singing a tune about harvests and home, words you'd forgotten had once sounded happy. The stew turns out to be tolerable, which is either comforting or deeply unsettling. It's spiced heavily with something that burns your tongue and distracts your brain, which might be the point. You wonder what the cook had to trade to get it. A few people laugh too loudly. Others talk too quickly, like language itself might fend off the dark. You catch snippets of rumor drifting through the room of cities gone silent, of ships burning in harbors, of doctors with masks like birds. Nobody contradicts anything anymore. Truth has become a matter of preference. A fiddler in the corner starts to play, his bow moving as though it remembers joy better than he does. The sound wraps around the room, and people tap their feet, clap hands, and for one dizzy instant, forget you do too. You sway with the rhythm, watching faces soften under the glow of firelight, each one beautiful in its stubborn refusal to accept the inevitable. Even Father Aldwin joins in, humming tunelessly, his cross glinting in the firelight as if it's pretending to be brave too. Outside, the wind howls down the street, carrying the faint scent of rot and ash, but no one moves to close the shutters. The tavern has become a fortress, built of noise and denial. Someone jokes about how the stew could kill faster than the plague, and the room erupts in laughter. That sounds a little too loud, a little too sharp. You laugh too, because the alternative is silence. When your bowl is empty, you scrape the last of the broth with a piece of stale bread, not wanting to waste a single drop. The mead keeps coming. The fire crackles, and somewhere between the toasts and the laughter, the fear slips away just enough to breathe. You look around at the faces tired, flushed, alive, and think that maybe this foolish, defiant feast is its own kind of prayer. As the night deepens, the crowd thins. People stumble home arm in arm, voices low, songs trailing behind them like fragile promises. You stay a little longer, watching the last embers fade. The tavern keeper wipes the tables in slow circles, humming again. You leave a coin beside your bowl, though he waves it off. Outside, the air feels colder, heavier, as if the laughter inside never existed. You pull your cloak tight and start toward home, the taste of mead still on your tongue and the faint sound of the fiddle echoing behind you. You know what's waiting in the morning, but tonight at least, you were full. The rumors arrive before breakfast, as usual. You wake to voices in the lane, two women arguing about whether the sickness rides on the wind or hides in the bread. One swears it's the baker's fault for kneading with unholy hands, while the other insists it's the stars. You lean out the window to catch more, but all you get is the tail end of, "And the moon hasn't been right since March." You look up at the pale daylight ghost of it and decide that yes, it does look smug, probably guilty. By midday, the theories have multiplied like fleas appropriately enough. Every person you pass has a new explanation to share, and all of them contradict each other with impressive confidence. The butcher says it's caused by bad air rising from sin, which makes you wonder how one airs out wickedness. The healer blames the wells, claiming water has gone, melancholic. The priest says it's the wrath of God, while his apprentice quietly whispers that it might be the wrath of the priest's cooking. You nod solemnly to each, pretending to agree, because in times like these, logic is suspicious and certainty is contagious. Children run through the square with sprigs of rosemary in their hair, yelling that witches curse the harvest. The miller's wife throws salt at them and shouts that witches don't exist, which is suspiciously defensive for someone with a black cat. Then someone mentions that foreigners brought the plague, though no one can name a foreigner they've actually met. The theory spreads anyway, because nothing moves faster than something to blame. By sunset, the villagers have collectively decided that the sickness is carried by strangers, women who hum too loudly, and the moon still looking down with that infuriating calm glow. You join a group gathered by the well, where an old man is explaining that the disease is born from cosmic imbalance. The planets are too close, he says, tapping his temple as proof of authority. Mars is angry. You point out that Mars is always angry, but this earns you a chorus of glares. The crowd murmurs agreement with him, even as he admits he's never actually seen a planet. Someone asks what should be done about it. Pray, he answers, and maybe hold your breath until it passes. The next morning, the baker boards up his shop because a rat was seen near his door, and everyone agrees it's an omen. The apothecary swears vinegar vapors will protect the pure of heart, though she also happens to sell vinegar by the jug. You buy one, just in case, and nearly choke on the fumes. A group of flagellants passes through, chanting and whipping themselves, leaving the air buzzing with guilt and confusion. You half consider joining them, if only for the exercise. By evening, the rumors have evolved into something almost beautiful in their chaos. You sit outside with your cup of weak ale and listen to them drift on the breeze. Stories of ghosts, curses, poisoned clouds, and rats as divine messengers. Someone declares that eating onions counteracts moonlight, and for a moment, this feels perfectly reasonable. You take a bite of one yourself, just to participate in the madness. When the bells toll for another soul, you look up at the sky again. The moon hangs fat and serene, glowing like it knows something you don't. You raise your mug toward it and mutter, "You could at least look guilty." It doesn't blink. It never does. But you keep watching anyway, waiting for a flicker of acknowledgement, or maybe a sign that the world still makes sense. Instead, you just get more silence, and somewhere far away, another rumor beginning to form. You start with a single charm, just to be safe. A small silver cross you buy from the blacksmith's wife, who swears her cousin hasn't coughed once since wearing one. It feels light and silly around your neck, but you keep it there anyway. Then you find a wolf tooth hanging in the market, strung on a leather cord and advertised as anti-plague. You don't ask how the tooth prevents illness or whether the wolf gave it willingly. You just hand over a few coins and feel instantly more powerful. Protection, you decide, is cumulative. Before long, you've turned superstition into a full-time occupation. You tie sprigs of rosemary above the door, a garlic braid by the window, and a piece of mirror near the hearth to reflect bad spirits. You even find a pebble shaped vaguely like a heart and decide it's lucky. The cat steals it once, but you retrieve it before disaster can notice. Every surface of your home begins to glitter with talismans, a shrine to fear disguised as preparedness. When the wind howls, you tell yourself it's bouncing harmlessly off your charm collection. The neighbors notice, of course. Some nod approvingly, others avoid eye contact, as if you've joined a minor cult. Marta, the woman with the bucket helmet, offers to trade you a dried frog for added insurance. You accept, because saying no to luck feels unlucky. The frog now hangs by the window, eternally surprised to be part of your decor. Old Roderick from the goat shed passes by, clutching a pouch of salt. "Wards off pestilence," he says. You trade him a sprig of thyme for solidarity. The exchange feels like commerce in madness, but at least it's social. Each night before bed, you make the rounds. You touch the cross, the tooth, the mirror, the pebble, whispering little half-prayers of your own invention. You thank the charms for their service, even though you suspect they're freeloaders. Still, the ritual feels good control, masquerading as faith. You sleep easier under the illusion that you've negotiated peace with fate. For a few nights, it even seems to work. The air feels lighter. Your cough disappears. The rats don't visit. You almost start to believe you've outwitted the plague through sheer accessorizing. Then one morning, you wake to find the rosemary brittle and the frog missing. The cord hangs empty, frayed at the end. You stare at it like a broken promise. The cat sits nearby, licking its paws with the satisfied indifference of an accomplice. You take it as a bad sign, though you're not sure for whom. You replace the frog with a feather you find on the doorstep. It's white, pure, conveniently symbolic. For a few hours you feel whole again, but by evening, the church bells toll again. Another name, another house. The charms on your wall suddenly look small, decorative, almost mocking. You try rearranging them: silver by the door, wolf tooth over the bed, mirror angled toward the moon, but nothing feels quite strong enough. You pour a cup of vinegar water and sip it like medicine, just to say you're doing something. The air tastes like superstition and garlic. You sit by the fire, your charms gleaming faintly in the flicker, and wonder how many prayers have turned into trinkets over the years. Maybe belief doesn't stop death. It just makes you feel braver while waiting. You tilt your head toward the ceiling and murmur to no one in particular, "Just one more day of luck." Then you pat the pebble in your pocket, because you've learned that hope, when nothing else works, is a charm too. They appear over the ridge at noon, a slow-moving procession of men in tattered tunics, backs gleaming with sweat and fresh red stripes. The sound reaches you before the sight does a rhythmic crack, like wet rope slapping stone, followed by chanting that wobbles between him and hysteria. The villagers gather instinctively, as if called by some grim curiosity, lining the road to watch the arrival of salvation in its most dramatic form. They march in pairs, faces hidden by hoods, each carrying a whip made of knotted leather. The air hums with incense and the metallic tang of blood. One man drags a cross behind him, another beats a drum, slow and steady, keeping time for the rhythm of penance. "Forgive us," they cry, voices hoarse, their bare feet slapping mud. You can't tell if they look holy or haunted, probably both. The priest greets them with cautious reverence, clutching his rosary like it might need reinforcement. The leader steps forward, a tall figure with a face so gaunt it seems carved from candle wax. He announces that they've come from the next town over, bringing repentance and a few unsettling ideas about how much suffering is enough. "The plague is God's punishment," he declares, raising his whip for emphasis, "and only through pain may the world be cleansed." He says it like he's proud of the discovery. The villagers murmur. Some cross themselves immediately. Others stare in uneasy fascination. You watch as the flagellants set to work again, the sound of leather and skin punctuating the silence like thunder in miniature. They move with terrifying coordination: whip, chant, step, whip, chant, step. The rhythm becomes hypnotic, both grotesque and mesmerizing. A child starts to cry, and her mother hushes her with trembling hands. Even the rats seem to keep their distance. You admire the dedication, if not the method. Their faith looks exhausting. You, personally, prefer your guilt at manageable levels and your tunic intact. Still, a part of you wonders, what if they're right? What if the plague really is divine judgment, and you're sitting comfortably in your sin while these men earn their redemption one lash at a time? You quickly dismiss the thought, deciding that moderate prayer and frequent hand-washing, or what passes for it, seems safer and significantly less painful. By evening, the flagellants have taken over the square. They sing now, low and rhythmic, voices blending into something mournful that seeps into the cracks of every window and heart. The crowd joins in hesitantly, as if sound alone might serve as repentance. You catch yourself humming along before realizing it's probably contagious in more ways than one. Later, they camp outside the village walls, lighting torches that flicker like restless souls. You watch from a distance as they continue their ritual beneath the rising moon, their silhouettes jerking in the firelight. One man collapses mid-swing, another helps him to his feet without missing a beat. The devotion is terrifying in its sincerity. You wrap your cloak tighter and head home. deciding that if forgiveness must be earned through self-inflicted agony, perhaps you'll settle for being slightly less forgiven. As you close your door, the chant still drifts on the wind, haunting, fervent, relentless. You whisper a quick prayer, just in case, and pat the wolf tooth at your neck. Faith comes in many forms, you think. Yours just happens to involve fewer open wounds. The town council meets in the tavern because it's the only building large enough to hold this much chaos, and because all great decisions apparently require alcohol. The benches creak under the weight of men who haven't slept properly in weeks. You take a seat near the back, parchment in hand, ready to record whatever brilliance unfolds. The air smells of sweat, smoke, and fear disguised as civic duty. A single candle flickers on the table, trying its best to illuminate leadership. The mayor starts by clearing his throat in the way men do when they're about to say nothing useful. "We must act decisively," he declares. The gathered council nods as if decisiveness were a tangible plan. Someone coughs sharply from the corner. All heads swivel. The man waves dismissively, "Just dust," but no one breathes for several seconds anyway. The scribe beside you dips his quill in wine instead of ink. You consider joining him. The healer stands, a pile of herbs dangling from her belt like trophies. She suggests burning juniper and keeping to one's home, which everyone agrees sounds reasonable in theory, but inconvenient in practice. The butcher interrupts to ask, who will keep selling meat if everyone's home? The baker chimes in that the butcher's meat might already be killing people faster than the plague. The two begin shouting about hygiene, a concept neither fully comprehends. The priest, seated between them, raises a trembling hand. "Gentlemen, please," he says, voice thin with exhaustion. "Faith will guide us through." He sneezes immediately afterward, sending half the room recoiling in terror. The mayor throws a cloth over his face and mumbles something about divine timing. You jot that down. Divine timing equals sneezing mid-sermon. Posterity demands accuracy. Someone suggests quarantining the sick on the edge of town. Another proposes closing the gates entirely. The miller objects because his flour cart is due tomorrow. The apothecary insists her latest tonic, mostly vinegar, wine, and ambition, will solve everything. A farmer raises his hand to ask what quarantine means, and after a lengthy explanation, decides he hates the idea on principle. The meeting begins to sound less like strategy and more like a family argument about who forgot to milk the cow. The mayor pounds the table for order, which achieves nothing except spilling half the wine. "We must remain calm," he shouts, which has never in history calmed anyone. The healer proposes prayer. The butcher proposes drinking, and both suggestions gain instant support. Within minutes, bottles are passed, and strategy dissolves into storytelling. You keep taking notes out of habit, though at this point, the record reads more like a tavern song than a plan. Outside, the bells toll again, faint but insistent. The sound seeps through the walls, and for a moment, everyone falls silent. The fire pops. The mayor exhales and mutters, "We'll meet again tomorrow." You know they will, because talking feels safer than acting, and wine feels safer than both. As the men file out, shoulders slumped and minds unsteady, you remain seated a while longer. You reread your notes. Plan A, burn herbs. Plan B, drink. Plan C, pray and hope for the best. You underline hope twice, because it's the only one anyone seems qualified to attempt. When you finally step outside, the night air is heavy, thick with the scent of smoke and something worse. You look up at the moon, still smug, still watching, and sigh. Behind you, laughter erupts in the tavern again, too loud, too forced. You clutch your notes like they might matter one day and head home, thinking that history, when it reads about this meeting, will probably do the same thing you just did. Shake its head and pour a drink. The bells start ringing before sunrise, not for prayer but for warning, a sound that crawls under your skin and refuses to leave. You count them out of habit 1, 2, 3, and stop when you realize they aren't stopping. Somewhere, a priest keeps pulling the rope as if noise alone might scare off death. You stare at your half-packed bag on the table and finally decide that no miracle is coming. The city has become a graveyard that just hasn't caught up with itself. You pack quickly, though quickly feels like a generous word when you keep pausing to decide what survival even looks like. Bread goes first, a small round loaf that's already hard at the edges. Dried beans follow, though you're not sure how you'll cook them. Then a flask of water, a knife, and your single optimistic possession, hope, small and absurd but persistent. You glance at your charms hanging by the door, touch them once for luck, and leave them behind. They've done what they can. Outside, the air stinks of smoke and despair. The street is quieter than it should be. Even the rats seem to have packed up early. A cart rattles past, carrying what looks like furniture until you notice a pale hand dangling off the side. You look away before you can confirm it. The tavern door hangs open, empty except for a mug still rocking slowly on its table. The wind carries the smell of vinegar, ash, and something sweeter that you choose not to identify. You head toward the gate, keeping your eyes on the road and your feet moving. The bells fade behind you, replaced by the occasional cough, a sound that once meant annoyance and now means farewell. A few others walk the same direction. Families, loners, faces hidden under scarves. No one speaks. Words have become dangerous. They draw attention, carry germs, and remind you you're still human. You pass a woman dragging a trunk half her size and a boy clutching a wooden toy like it's a relic. He meets your gaze briefly before his mother pulls him along. Everyone moves as though chased by something invisible, which, in a way, you all are. Beyond the walls, the countryside stretches out, wide and strange in its emptiness. The road smells of smoke and bad. Decisions villages burned to contain the sickness, camps abandoned in panic. The sky looks too clean for the world it hangs over. You walk until your legs ache, passing fields where crops rot in neat rows, untouched because no one dares harvest them. Once, you see a figure in the distance, waving a white cloth. You wave back before realizing it's not a signal but a warning. You change direction. By dusk, your shoes are slick with mud and something darker. You find a patch of grass near a ruined shrine and sit, unwrapping your bread like it's a treasure. It tastes of ash and memory. A single crow watches from the broken roof, head tilted as if judging your portion. You raise the crust to it in mock toast. To survival, you whisper. The crow doesn't respond. The road ahead disappears into shadow, but you know you'll keep walking. The city behind you is already fading into legend, a place you lived once, before bells meant death, and breathing felt like gambling. You settle your pack against a stone and stare up at the stars, absurdly calm in their distance. Somewhere, beyond sight, another bell begins to ring. You close your eyes, clutch your knife, and tell yourself it's far enough away not to matter. For tonight, that's good enough. The countryside looks peaceful from a distance, like a painting of safety. Rolling fields, open air, birds that don't seem to know civilization has collapsed. You almost sigh with relief as the city smoke fades behind you. Almost. Because the moment you turn down the dirt road toward a quiet village, you see them people, everywhere. Carts piled with everything that isn't nailed down, families shouting, chickens staging escapes. You haven't found safety. You've found everyone else who thought the same thing. Congratulations. You've invented medieval traffic. You slow your pace to match the crawl of humanity clogging the path. A wagon axle has snapped ahead, and 3 men are arguing about divine punishment while one woman insists the goat is cursed. You step around the chaos carefully, clutching your pack closer. Someone sneezes, and 20 heads whip around like owls. The man waves his hands, just hay fever, but no one's buying it. You quicken your steps, because the only thing faster than the plague is suspicion. By the time you reach the next hamlet, it's clear the countryside isn't empty, it's full to bursting. The inn has a line out the door, which would be comforting if the crowd weren't shouting about who deserves a bed more. The innkeeper has taken to standing on a barrel, swearing by all the saints that no one else will fit inside unless they plan to share space with the pig in the cellar. You consider volunteering for the pig spot, but remember you still have some dignity left, or at least you did when the day started. You try the stables, but they're full of families too, people huddled on hay, clutching whatever possessions they managed to drag this far. The smell suggests the horses have either fled or died of disappointment. A farmer near the gate offers to let you stay in his barn for a fair price, which turns out to be half your food. You try to negotiate. He counters with a sermon about charity and then doubles the price. You pay. Survival, you're learning, is just a polite word for compromise. Inside, you carve out a corner between a crate of turnips and someone's sleeping grandmother. The walls creak. The air hums with murmurs and coughs, and the cat you thought followed you here has vanished. You sit quietly, eating your ration of bread, pretending you can't hear the argument breaking out near the door. The words "witch," "sick," and "my goat didn't cough before you arrived" drift through the straw. You pull your cloak tighter and stare at the beams above, wondering how far you'd have to walk before the world stopped collapsing in on itself. When dawn comes, the fields look tranquil again, dew shining like nothing's wrong. The illusion almost fools you until a cart trundles past, loaded with bodies under a sheet. The driver hums softly, as if music might make it less real. You shoulder your pack and step back onto the road, joining the quiet shuffle of others doing the same. Each traveler carries the same expression: tired, wary, pretending the fresh air means safety. The countryside stretches endlessly ahead. Green hills, empty cottages, hope painted in wide strokes. But now you know better. Safety isn't a place. It's a rumor people carry with them until they realize it's already moved on. You walk faster, the road crackling under your feet, the sky pale and pitiless above. The air smells of smoke again. Bad decisions travel well. It starts with a sound you don't want to hear. A wet, uncertain exhale, followed by a cough that doesn't belong to any healthy creature. You freeze mid-step, one hand on the reins, hoping it came from somewhere else. A bird, maybe, or your imagination, which has been especially creative lately. But then the horse does it again, louder this time, a deep shuddering hack that sends a small puff of something unpleasant into the morning air. You stare at the animal, and it stares back with the weary indifference of a creature that's seen too much. You're both filthy, hungry, and increasingly aware that hygiene is a myth. You're fine, you say, because that's what you want to believe. The horse flicks its tail as if to say, "So are you," and the two of you silently agree to pretend this never happened. Denial, after all, has served you both admirably so far. The road stretches ahead, a muddy ribbon through the countryside, dotted with the remains of better intentions. An abandoned cart, a pair of shoes, a single glove nailed to a fence post for reasons you refuse to investigate. The air smells of wet hay and distant smoke, the perfume of civilization unraveling one bonfire at a time. You hum a little tune to keep your thoughts from turning inward, but the horse coughs again halfway through the second verse. You stop humming. You tell yourself maybe it's just dust. Horses cough from dust. You cough from dust. Everyone coughs from dust. It's practically fashionable. You pull the reins gently and lead the horse to a small stream to drink, hoping water will fix what denial can't. The animal lowers its head, snorts, and drinks slowly. You watch its reflection in the water, its ribs showing a little too sharply, its eyes duller than before. It sneezes into the stream, scattering ripples that distort its face into something uncomfortably human. You consider your options. You could leave it here, lighten your load, travel faster on foot. But the thought makes your chest ache. You've shared too many miles, too many nights sleeping beside its warmth. Abandoning it would feel like admitting you're no longer the kind of person who hopes for things. You reach out and run a hand along its neck. It feels hot under your palm. You whisper nonsense comfort, the kind you barely believe in, and it exhales a tired breath that sounds too much like understanding. By afternoon, the coughs are more frequent. A passing farmer eyes you both with suspicion and veers off the road, muttering about curses. You shout after him that it's just a tickle in the throat, but your voice cracks on the word tickle. You keep walking, trying not to count the intervals between coughs, trying not to imagine what comes next. The rhythm becomes a part of the journey. Step, cough, silence. Step, cough, silence. Like a clock measuring the distance between you and the world you used to know. When the sun begins to dip, you find shelter near an old stone chapel. You tether the horse in the shadow of the wall, offer it the last of the oats, and sit beside it, too tired to move. The evening air is cool and clean, carrying none of the fear that haunts the towns. For a while, neither of you make a sound. The quiet feels merciful. Then the horse coughs again, softer this time, almost apologetic. You close your eyes. "We won't talk about it," you murmur. The horse flicks its ear, a slow, resigned motion, and lowers its head. You lean against the wall, staring up at the first stars peeking through the fading light. You tell yourself tomorrow will be better, that horses get over things, that maybe this is just exhaustion. But when you listen closely, the cough lingers in your memory long after it stops echoing in the night. The monastery appears like a miracle carved out of fog, gray stone walls, steady chanting, and an actual gate that closes. You stand outside for a long moment, unsure if you're allowed to approach, until a monk with eyebrows like storm clouds peers down from the wall and asks if you're dead. You assure him you're not. He nods and waves you in, as though that settles everything. Inside, it's strangely peaceful. The air smells of wax, herbs, and something that could almost be comfort. Bells toll softly somewhere out of sight, and a few monks glide past, heads bowed, voices murmuring in the steady rhythm of prayer. You follow one to the courtyard, where Brother Cuthbert, the man who'd mistaken you for a corpse, offers you a bowl of soup without asking your name. You eat it gratefully. It tastes like cabbage, mystery, and relief. The monks keep their routine like clockwork: prayer at dawn, silence at noon, soup at nearly every hour in between. You adapt quickly. Silence, after all, is the most luxurious sound in a world full of coughing. For a while, it feels like you've stumbled into a secret pocket of survival. No rats, no screams, just bees humming lazily over the herb garden and the steady clack of rosary beads. You even start to sleep through the night again, which feels like a forgotten talent. But nothing stays peaceful for long. You first notice it during morning prayer. Brother Cuthbert stops mid-chant to glance out the window, muttering something about the conversation resuming. You assume he's misremembered a verse. Later, in the garden, you catch him speaking softly to a tree. You pause, unsure whether to interrupt or applaud. The tree, to its credit, looks attentive. When he notices you watching, he smiles vaguely. "They listen better than people," he says, and goes back to pruning basil with great conviction. You decide not to mention it. Everyone copes differently. The world's ending, and if someone wants to chat with an oak about divine wisdom, that's his business. Still, you begin to notice other oddities. Brother Matthew insists the plague can't cross holy ground, yet keeps sprinkling vinegar along the chapel floor for insurance. Brother Andrew hasn't spoken in days, but communicates solely through eyebrow movements and dramatic sighs. One novice carries a candle everywhere he goes, swearing the flame wards off evil, though mostly it just drips on his sandals. Despite the eccentricities, the place works. No one's fallen ill. Meals appear like clockwork. You help in the kitchen, stirring pots of soup, while Brother Cuthbert lectures about patience and celery. You start to think you might survive here indefinitely, growing old among chanting and questionable theology. Peace feels fragile, but real. Then, one evening, while you're scrubbing bowls, you hear laughter echoing through the courtyard, sharp, wild, and not the holy kind. You find Brother Cuthbert outside, arms raised to the twilight sky, declaring loudly that the trees have forgiven humanity. A few monks watch from the cloister, whispering prayers under their breath. You ask gently if he's all right. "Of course," he says, eyes bright. "They told me the plague is only a test. The trees say renewal always follows decay." Then he hugs the nearest trunk like an old friend. That night, no one speaks during supper. The chanting feels tighter, less sure of itself. You eat your soup in silence, thinking about how sanity and faith sometimes look identical from a distance. Outside, the wind rustles the garden, carrying faint whispers through the leaves. You tell yourself it's only the breeze. Still, when you lie down to sleep, you find yourself listening, half expecting the trees to start their own sermon, and when Brother Cuthbert passes your door humming softly to himself, you don't stop him. You've learned not to interrupt anyone who's found something that still listens back. The monks insist their tonic works. You're less convinced, but you drink it anyway because refusing would look faithless, and faith is the main currency here. Brother Matthew presents the cup with reverence, the liquid sloshing faintly as he mutters a blessing that sounds suspiciously improvised. You sniff it and nearly lose consciousness. It smells like pickled despair. Still, you raise it to your lips, trying to appear grateful while calculating how much internal damage vinegar can reasonably cause. The first sip burns like confession. The second feels personal. You cough into your sleeve, eyes watering, and Brother Matthew beams as if this reaction proves it's working. You feel the cleansing power. "Yes?" he says. You nod weakly, though it feels more like the cleansing fire. "Good," he adds. "The plague cannot live in such purity." You suspect, neither can you. The recipe, you later learn, includes vinegar, thyme, sage, and a touch of faith, the latter being the only ingredient in endless supply. The brothers brew it in the infirmary, a room that smells of herbs and hopeful delusion. Clay jars line the shelves, each labeled in spidery Latin handwriting that translates roughly to possibly poisonous. Brother Cuthbert oversees the process, humming to himself while tossing handfuls of leaves into steaming pots. Occasionally, he consults the trees outside for advice. They never seem to answer, but that doesn't stop him from nodding thoughtfully, as if they've just confirmed an important dosage ratio. Patients come and go, or more accurately, come and either leave or don't. Those who recover are declared examples of divine favor. Those who don't are proof that God needed them elsewhere. The logic is circular, but comforting. One woman claims she saw angels after 3 cups of tonic. Another simply burped thyme for 2 days and declared herself cured. You start to wonder if the plague avoids the monastery not out of fear of faith, but out of confusion. When you fall ill with nothing more than exhaustion, they insist on treatment anyway. Brother Cuthbert brings you a fresh cup of tonic, this one accompanied by a whispered prayer involving Saint Roch, Saint Sebastian, and possibly Saint someone they just made up. You ask if the tonic will help. "Of course," he says. "If not the body, then the soul." You drink it because arguing with monks feels like tempting fate. The taste hits like punishment and penance combined, but afterward you do feel something lighter, emptier, possibly hollowed out in all the wrong ways. For days, your throat tingles with acidity and sanctity in equal measure. You start to join the brothers for prayer, just to distract yourself from the taste. Their chanting has a rhythm that borders on hypnotic, and in those moments, you almost believe it's working. The air feels cleaner here, the walls sturdy, the faith contagious in a way that doesn't kill. Still, you can't help noticing how the line between medicine and miracle has completely vanished. The brothers don't see it as a problem. To them, both come from the same source. God provides remedies in strange forms, Brother Matthew says one afternoon as he crushes garlic into a paste. Sometimes he hides healing in the humblest ingredients. You glance at the bucket of vinegar beside him and decide that humility has gone too far. By the end of the week, you're still alive, which everyone considers proof the tonic works. You're less certain, but you've learned not to argue with success or monks with ladles. You sit in the courtyard with a bowl of their endless cabbage soup, the evening light spilling gold across the stone walls. Brother Cuthbert walks by, greeting each tree with a pat like old friends. The wind carries a faint trace of time, sharp and familiar. You take a slow breath, let it burn your lungs a little, and smile despite yourself. Maybe faith doesn't heal the body, but it keeps the fear at bay, and right now, that feels close enough. The cat appears one morning in the cloister, sitting in a patch of sunlight like it owns it. You're not sure where it came from, but it's far too clean and far too confident to be feral. It blinks slowly at you, the universal sign for feed me, and you, fool that you are, immediately comply. The kitchen still smells of yesterday's cabbage soup, so you sneak a scrap of bread instead. The cat sniffs, disdainful, then eats anyway. You call that progress. The monks are less enthused. Brother Matthew crosses himself when he sees it, muttering something about omens. Brother Cuthbert insists cats are servants of the devil, which feels rich coming from a man who holds theological debates with trees. You point out that a creature who kills rats might actually be a divine gift. Temptation often arrives in soft fur, he says solemnly, as if quoting scripture. You feed the cat again that evening, just to test how much temptation you can handle. It starts following you everywhere through the gardens, around the cloister walk, even into morning prayers, where it curls up beneath your bench like it's one of the brethren. No one dares shoo it away, perhaps fearing divine reprisal or fleas. You begin to suspect it's smarter than most of the humans left alive. When Brother Andrew accidentally drops a loaf of bread, the cat snatches it before anyone else can react. The monks call it gluttony, you call it efficiency. You name it Thomas, though it never answers to that or any name at all. It seems to live according to its own calendar, its own faith. Each day it disappears at dawn and returns by supper, tail high, belly slightly rounder. You imagine it spends its hours purging the monastery's rat population, or possibly running a small crime ring in the surrounding fields. Either way, the rodent sightings drop to nearly zero. Brother Matthew claims it's the result of his prayers. You don't correct him. At night, Thomas curls up near your cot, a small warm weight that hums when it breathes. You've learned that the world outside is chaos, fire, plague, despair, but inside this tiny cell, life still makes a kind of quiet sense. You stroke his fur and wonder how something so calm can survive in times like these. Maybe that's his secret. He doesn't think about survival at all. He just lives. One evening, as you share a crust of bread with him, Brother Cuthbert wanders by, pausing long enough to scowl. "The beast brings bad luck," he warns. He looks at souls too long. You glance at the cat, who's staring at nothing in particular with serene indifference. "Maybe he's judging us," you reply. Cuthbert frowns, unsure whether to be offended or converted, and drifts off toward his trees. Weeks pass. The cat grows plumper, the monastery cleaner, and the monks quieter. Perhaps they've realized that pest control is its own form of prayer. When the wind howls through the stone halls at night, you catch glimpses of Thomas stalking confidently along the shadows, guardian of this fragile refuge. You start leaving a little extra soup by the door, not because he needs it, but because it feels good to give something back to the only creature that seems truly immune to fear. Then, one morning, he doesn't return. The day stretches long and uneasy. The monks take it as a sign, arguing whether the devil reclaimed his servant or the Lord elevated him to feline sainthood. You just sit in the courtyard, staring at the empty patch of sunlight he used to claim. By evening, you hear a faint meow from the garden wall, and there he is, dirty, triumphant, carrying a dead rat the size of your forearm. He drops it proudly at your feet, and resumes his seat in the sun as if nothing ever happened. You laugh loudly, freely, the sound startling even you. The monks glance over, scandalized, but you can't stop. The cat blinks lazily, the faintest flick of his tail betraying amusement. For the first time in months, you feel like maybe humanity still has a chance. Not through medicine or prayer, but through the quiet, absurd persistence of small, fearless things. Night in the abbey falls softly, as if the world is afraid to make noise. The candles tremble in their sconces, dripping wax like tiny melting clocks. Shadows climb the walls, stretching thin and uncertain across stone and timber. You lie on a narrow cot that creaks with every breath, pretending not to notice the rhythmic snoring of the monk beside you. It's oddly reassuring until he stops for just a little too long. You stare into the dark, counting the seconds, waiting for the next breath that finally comes in with a wheeze. You hum a hymn quietly, half out of faith, half to prove the silence hasn't won. The abbey at night is its own creature. The day's order dissolves into whispers, the groan of wood, the flutter of a moth too close to flame, the occasional mutter of Brother Cuthbert arguing with dreams or saints. Somewhere in the hall, a rat scurries before remembering that Thomas the cat is on patrol. You hear a faint squeak, then nothing. Pest control, medieval style. You whisper a quick prayer for the rat's soul, though mostly in gratitude that it wasn't you. You turn over, pulling the coarse blanket up to your chin, trying to forget that every surface here has a story. The floorboards creak like confessions, the walls sigh with memory. Outside, the wind picks up, moaning through the courtyard arches. It sounds like the world itself is praying low, endless, and afraid. The candles sputter again, and you stare at the flame until it stops trembling. It's hard to tell if the flicker is the light or your own heartbeat. Sleep doesn't come easy anymore, not when every sound could be either life or its ending. You try to focus on the chanting rhythm still lingering in your head from Vespers, that steady hum that used to mean safety. The monks always say night is when the soul speaks loudest. You think the soul mostly mutters complaints about drafts and mortality. Beside you, Brother Matthew snores again, loud enough to sound immortal. You envy his peace, though a small, anxious part of you keeps listening in case that peace becomes permanent. Somewhere down the hall, a door creaks open. You freeze. Footsteps echo softly on the stones, too light to be one of the older brothers. You hold your breath as they draw nearer, pausing outside the dormitory door. For a heartbeat, the air feels thick with watching. Then the steps retreat, slow and deliberate, fading back into the cloister. You tell yourself it was just Brother Andrew fetching more candles, but he's the kind who prefers darkness. You hum the hymn again, a little louder this time. The cat appears at your feet without sound, leaping onto the cot and curling up as if summoned by your unease. Its weight is small but solid, the faint vibration of its purr steadying your nerves. You scratch behind its ear, whispering thanks. It yawns in your face and falls asleep instantly. Typical. You'd trade your half of heaven for that kind of confidence. When you finally doze, your dreams are strange, endless corridors, lined with candles, each one burning down faster the closer you walk. In one, Brother Cuthbert's trees have moved inside, their roots pushing through the stone, to whisper prayers of their own. You wake to find the room still, the air thick with smoke and breath. The first faint light of dawn seeps through the cracks in the shutters, painting everything in pale forgiveness. Brother Matthew stirs beside you, still alive, still snoring. The candles have burned themselves out, leaving trails of wax like ghosts on the table. The abbey feels suspended between two worlds, the living and whatever comes after. You stretch, stiff and ungraceful, and the cat hops down to vanish into the morning like a spirit with chores to do. You rise quietly, humming one last bar of your midnight hymn. The echoes follow you down the corridor, mingling with the distant sound of morning bells. Another night survived, another prayer unanswered but not ignored. The abbey exhales around you, the wood creaking as if to say, "For now." You wake to bells again. Of course you do. They've become your alarm clock, your weather forecast, and your death toll all at once. The sound creeps through the cold stone walls, rolling like thunder that forgot how to be majestic. You sit up slowly, head heavy with the kind of dread that no amount of prayer or porridge can fix. The bells only mean one thing now. The plague has arrived, punctual as ever. You practice your shocked face before stepping out of your cell, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, a soft gasp if necessary. Everyone's pretending they didn't see this coming. You'd think a place full of men who claim to read divine signs would have noticed the rats first. But no. Brother Cuthbert insisted the coughing was just the air growing too pious. The air, apparently, is now terminal. The courtyard is chaos disguised as prayer. Monks shuffle in tight circles, clutching rosaries, whispering psalms that sound increasingly desperate. The cat, unimpressed, sits atop a rain barrel, licking its paw. You take comfort in its indifference. It means the world hasn't completely lost its sense of hierarchy. The abbot stands near the chapel door, looking more bewildered than holy, muttering something about containment as if holiness spreads faster than germs. The sick are gathered in the refectory, where soup has been replaced by vinegar fumes and the faint sound of gagging. You linger by the doorway long enough to spot Brother Matthew lying pale beneath a wool blanket, his hand twitching over his rosary. You want to step closer, to say something comforting, but there's no language left for this. You settle for silence and the illusion of distance. Brother Cuthbert appears at your shoulder, his eyes bright in a way that suggests divine madness or too much tonic. "The Lord tests us," he says. "The trees warned me last night." You don't ask what the trees said. You've learned better. He presses a sprig of rosemary into your hand, whispering, "For protection." You tuck it into your sleeve, because refusing gifts from a man who hears vegetation is bad etiquette. By afternoon, the chanting has changed. It's no longer hopeful, it's bargaining. You spend an hour helping to carry water to the sick, though you hold your breath so much you nearly faint. The air feels heavy, as if the monastery itself is breathing slower. Even the bells seem tired now, their sound dragging through the air like a last rite. That evening, the abbot gathers everyone in the chapel. Candlelight wobbles across the faces of men who have spent years trying to master fear, now rediscovering how human they still are. "Faith will protect us," the abbot says, voice trembling. You want to believe him, but you've seen faith lose before. You look down the row of monks and realize half are already sweating through their robes. After prayers, you find your way to the cloister garden. The wind carries a strange stillness, the kind that feels earned. The cat pads beside you, tail high, expression neutral as ever. You whisper, "Looks like it's time to move on," though you're not sure if you're talking to the cat or yourself. The creature flicks an ear, as if to say, "Obviously." You pack before dawn. Bread, flask, the rosemary sprig. You leave the rest, the bells, the chanting, the ghosts that will stay to keep count. As you slip through the monastery gate, you glance back once. The sky glows faintly with early light, painting the abbey gold for a moment that feels almost merciful. Then, a bell rings again, low and final, and you keep walking. The forest greets you like an old friend who doesn't remember your name. You step into the trees, and they close around you with that heavy green silence that makes every sound you make feel like an intrusion. Your boots sink into damp earth, and somewhere above, a crow laughs the kind of laugh that sounds personal. The monastery is gone behind you now, its bells replaced by the endless hum of things that don't care if you survive. You find a clearing by a crooked stream and declare it your new home, mostly because your legs stop cooperating. You drop your pack and sit on a fallen log, trying to look like someone who chose this lifestyle on purpose. The air smells like wet moss and old secrets. You tell yourself it's peace. It mostly feels like isolation with better scenery. You build a fire after a long and humbling argument with damp wood. Smoke rises unevenly, curling through the branches like it's searching for someone better to follow. When it finally catches, you nearly cry from pride. Civilization distilled into a flicker of flame and burnt fingertips. You hold your hands over the fire and pretend the warmth feels like companionship. By dusk, the woods grow louder. Twigs crack, owls trade gossip, and something unseen wades through the stream with the confidence of a creature that's never worried about taxes or plague. You hum a hymn to steady yourself. It sounds thin against the night, swallowed by the whisper of leaves that move though there's no wind. You decide to talk to the trees instead. They don't interrupt, which is nice, but their silence feels loaded. Fine, you say. Judge me then. The trees don't deny it. Your dinner consists of hard bread, one surviving onion, and the hope that starvation makes everything taste profound. You chew slowly, watching sparks climb into the dark. Somewhere beyond the firelight, something exhales. You tighten your cloak and tell yourself it's the breeze. The breeze doesn't usually sound carnivorous, but it's been that kind of year. As the stars emerge, the forest shifts. What looked like stillness in daylight becomes motion everywhere. Moths battering at the firelight, fox eyes glinting in the distance, mist curling low and alive. You lie down on your cloak, staring up through the branches, wondering if the sky has always been this wide or if you just stopped noticing. Sleep doesn't come easily. Every sound has a story, and most of them end badly. You dream of the monastery's bells and wake to the crackle of the dying fire. The night presses in close, the dark so complete it feels heavy. You think about the monks, about Brother Cuthbert and his whispering trees, and realize you might finally understand him. Solitude has a voice. You just have to listen long enough to hear it. When morning comes, the forest is mist and bird song. You stretch, bones stiff, mind raw but alive. The stream glimmers faintly as if mocking you for surviving one more night. You pack your things, thank the trees for their silent company, and promise to leave no trace except your doubt. One of the branches creaks in the wind. You choose to take it as approval. You find the hermit when the forest runs out of paths and starts offering warnings instead. His hut squats beneath a leaning oak, built entirely of branches, bark, and poor decisions. Smoke curls lazily from a hole in the roof, and something that smells halfway between stew and compost wafts through the air. You hesitate at the threshold, wondering if this is wisdom or just homelessness with better branding. Then a voice rasps from inside. Either come in or stop breathing so loud. Inside, the light is dim, the air thick with herbs, smoke, and what might once have been incense before evolving into something else entirely. The hermit sits cross-legged near a fire pit, wrapped in furs that might still be alive, stirring a pot with a stick that looks like it used to be part of a tree that objected. His beard is so long it has its own sense of direction. His eyes, however, are sharp, like someone who's been alone long enough to notice everything that moves, including your heartbeat. Sit, he says, pointing to a patch of moss that looks questionably damp. You obey, mostly because people who live in the woods and talk to themselves are unpredictable in the knife department. He offers you a bowl of whatever's in the pot. You take it. The liquid tastes of roots, regret, and faintly of goat. You smile politely. He nods as if you've passed some invisible test. You've come for wisdom, he says. It's not a question, which is convenient since your mouth is still processing the stew. People always do. They come asking how to live, how to fight death, how to stop being afraid. He scratches his beard. But mostly, they just want to know how to not die immediately. You nod, swallowing something that crunches. Good, he says. You have the right priorities. He gestures around the hut with the solemnity of a priest unveiling a relic. Survival is simple, Eat roots. Avoid people. Never trust a smiling goat. You wait for elaboration. He offers none. You blink. He takes your silence as awe. People carry sickness in their breath and sin in their hearts. Trees carry neither, unless you count sap as sin, which some do. He leans closer. The plague is clever, but loneliness is cleverer. It doesn't kill you fast, it just teaches you to stop, noticing. You nod again, pretending you understand, because the alternative might involve another bowl of stew. He smiles an event so rare you almost drop your spoon. You'll learn. You'll listen to the wind. It lies, but not as much as men do. Then he claps once and stands, the movement sending a cloud of dust and possibly fleas into the air. Now help me check the traps. Wisdom comes faster with work. Outside, the forest feels different, thicker somehow. He moves like he belongs here, stepping over roots without looking, humming something tuneless but steady. You follow, tripping twice and pretending it's part of your spiritual process. The traps are crude loops of rope and sharpened sticks baited with berries, and every single one of them is empty. The hermit frowns as though personally betrayed. Even the rabbits know better these days, he mutters. They watch people die and think, no, not today. Back at the hut, he settles by the fire again, muttering prayers to saints you're fairly certain he invented. A goat wanders up to the door, eyes bright, mouth curved into what could generously be called a smile. You glance at the hermit, waiting for the reaction. He stiffens. That one knows things, he whispers. The goat bleats softly. You both freeze. Never trust it, he hisses. They watch you when you sleep. You decide not to ask how he knows. Night falls quickly, the fire crackling low as insects take over the silence. The hermit's wisdom continues between mouthfuls of questionable stew. You survive by staying small, he says, small and quiet. The plague hunts crowds, not whispers. He looks at you through the smoke. You're still loud inside. That's dangerous. You think of bells, of monks coughing into holy silence, of cities that forgot how to breathe. Maybe he's right. Maybe the world is ending, and the only safe sound left is your own heartbeat pretending not to be afraid. When he finally curls into his furs, muttering a blessing that might also be a curse, you sit awake, staring into the dying fire. The forest murmurs beyond the walls, the night deep and endless. You scratch your wrist and realize the fleas have found you. You laugh quietly to yourself, because of course wisdom comes with parasites. Nothing good is ever free. You meet the alchemist on a road that looks more like an afterthought than a path, mud, stones, and the faint smell of disappointment. He appears out of the mist like a badly timed miracle, leading a donkey loaded with glass jars, copper pots, and the quiet jingle of unfulfilled promises. His hat is too tall, his smile too confident, and his robe bears more stains than faith. Traveler, he calls, as if you're old friends who just happen to be dying at the same rate. Fortune favors you today, I carry salvation. You stop because people who say things like that usually also carry knives or sermons. The donkey eyes you with pity. The man gestures to a flask, glowing faintly in the dim light. My cure, he says proudly, crafted from mercury, crushed pearls, and optimism distilled under the waning moon. He holds it out with reverence, the liquid, swirling silver, almost beautiful if you don't think about the mercury part. You ask what exactly it cures. He smiles wider. Everything, he says, especially despair. You tell him you're only mildly afflicted with despair and not ready to die by alchemy. He looks offended. It's perfectly safe, he insists. I tested it myself. You glance at his trembling hands and the faint silver sheen on his lips and decide not to comment. Besides, he adds, lowering his voice conspiratorially, the church doesn't want people to know it works. They fear my brilliance. You've heard that tone before from the monk who swore the plague was caused by rude thoughts. The alchemist launches into a sales pitch that sounds more like a sermon delivered by a man who's been awake for 4 days straight. He talks about humors, celestial alignment, and how Mercury balances the soul's vibrations. You nod politely, the universal gesture for, "I would rather be anywhere else." The donkey sneezes, which feels like divine agreement. "I can offer you a discount," he says suddenly, "for your sincerity." You weren't aware you'd been sincere, but apparently it's negotiable. He produces a small vial from a pocket and waves it dramatically. "Just a drop under the tongue each morning," he says. "You'll live forever." You ask how long he's been taking it. 3 years, he says proudly. "Though my memory has grown, creative." You decline, gently but firmly. He stares at you for a long moment, eyes gleaming like someone who's seen too many failed experiments. "You'll change your mind," he says finally, when the fever comes. He packs up his vials with theatrical sighs, each one clinking like a lost opportunity. You watch him shuffle down the road, muttering calculations under his breath, the donkey trudging loyally behind. You almost feel bad for him, someone still trying to solve death with math and moonlight. As the sound of his cart fades, you sit by the roadside, pulling out a scrap of bread that tastes like ash but promises survival. The forest hums softly around you, uncaring. For a moment, you imagine the alchemist's cure actually working, cities reborn under silver rain, people laughing instead of coughing. But then you picture the same cure burning through veins like liquid madness, and the fantasy crumbles as quickly as it came. The wind shifts, carrying the faint metallic scent of whatever he left behind. You wrap your cloak tighter and whisper to no one, "I'll take my chances with reality." The road stretches ahead, empty and endless. Somewhere far behind, another bell tolls, faint and familiar, and you walk on, following the sound of your own stubborn heartbeat. The first thing you build is not a hut but a schedule, because without bells or monks or plagues nearby, time turns slippery. You decide mornings are for pretending you're productive and evenings are for pretending you're not lonely. The hut comes next, assembled from branches, stubbornness, and a prayer to every saint of carpentry. It leans slightly, as if already tired of existing, but it stands. That counts as architecture. You call it home because no one else will argue. You stockpile what you can. Dry roots, mushrooms, you're 80% sure are food, and enough firewood to look impressive if anyone ever visits, which no one will. The hermit's advice rings in your head: eat roots, avoid people, don't trust goats, and you add a fourth rule: stop making soup. It was a noble idea the first 5 days, comforting even. By day 12, you would trade your soul for a crust of bread that doesn't float. The woods settle around you with a kind of heavy approval, the air damp and full of slow noises. You wake each morning to birds you can't name and sleep each night to the creak of your hut shifting like it's remembering it used to be a tree. Sometimes you talk aloud just to prove your voice still works. The trees listen politely. You suspect they judge you anyway. Your days take shape. You fetch water, check traps that are never full, and stare at clouds like they hold answers. You tell yourself you're learning to live simply, though simply is another word for hungry. The cat visits sometimes, a streak of gray through the brush, eyes glinting with the calm superiority of one who never doubted their place in the food chain. You feed it scraps and pretend it's gratitude when it doesn't immediately leave. One afternoon, you find yourself humming as you patch the roof, some half-remembered hymn turned into nonsense. The sound feels foreign, human. For a moment, you forget the bells, the smoke, the faces you left behind. The forest smells like pine and wet earth instead of death. You start to think maybe this is what surviving means, not triumph, just persistence. Then the rain comes. It doesn't fall so much as attack. The hut leaks in 7 places, each one a personal insult. You sit in the middle, wrapped in your cloak, watching the floor slowly become a pond. The cat appears at the door, glaring at you like it expected better accommodations. "Don't start," you mutter, tossing it the driest corner of the blanket. It takes the spot without gratitude, because cats understand ownership better than gods do. By the second week, your reflection in the stream looks like someone who's lost a debate with the elements. Your hair has learned new shapes, your hands are calloused, and your expression has settled into something between suspicion and serenity. You laugh more easily now, small, startled bursts that come when you realize how absurd it all is. Civilization burns itself out, and here you are arguing with a squirrel over nuts. You catch yourself thinking of the monastery sometimes, of Brother Cuthbert talking to trees, of the bells tolling endlessly. You wonder if anyone's left to ring them. The thought drifts through your mind like smoke, lingering but fading all the same. You no longer measure time by bells or meals or fear. You measure it by sunrises, by how many times you can make fire before the flint wears thin. At night, when the forest goes quiet and the stars feel too close, you lie awake, listening to the wind press against the walls. It sounds almost like breathing. You whisper to it, not words exactly, just acknowledgement. You're still here, still stubborn, still something that refuses to be erased. The wind doesn't answer, but it doesn't leave either. By the end of the second week, you realize something strange. You've stopped counting days. Survival has become less of a question and more of a habit. You can't remember the last time you thought about dying, which must mean you're doing it right. The soup still tastes like punishment. The cat still pretends it doesn't care, and the hut still leans dangerously toward collapse. But the fire catches each night. Your hands remember their tasks, and your body, traitorous thing, keeps living. You stare into the flames, watching sparks rise and vanish, and decide that 2 weeks in the wilderness feels suspiciously like immortality, or at least the early stages of it. You dream of the old village again. It comes to you the way ghosts do, uninvited, but familiar, full of the sounds you didn't realize you'd memorized. The bells ring, but softly now, like they've forgiven you for surviving. You see the crooked roofs, the muddy lanes, the little square where everyone gathered to trade, gossip, and collectively deny reality. The baker's stall is there too, smelling of yeast and ash, and the man himself sweaty, flour-dusted, always swearing he'd retire after one more batch. He never did. You smile in the dream, because in the dream he's still shouting at his apprentice for burning the crusts. You wander the streets, barefoot and invisible. The gossipers perch on benches like crows, trading theories about who's courting whom and who's cursed with what. You can almost hear your name in their whispers, though that might just be habit. The butcher laughs too loudly at something unfunny. The children chase each other past the well, their laughter pure and unbearable. It's all so normal that it aches. Even the air feels right, the heavy smell of smoke and bread, the faint stench of the tanner's yard that everyone pretended not to notice. Then there's the rooster, the same one who never learned mornings from afternoons, crowing at all the wrong hours like a drunk herald. You used to hate it, swearing vengeance each time it woke you at midnight. Now, in the dream, its voice feels like proof that time still has shape. You look for it on the fence post, expecting its ridiculous strut, but the perch is empty. You call softly, out of habit. No answer. You walk past the church, the tavern, the healer's cottage, all still standing, all too clean. Dreams never get the dirt right. No flies, no mold, no blood on the cobbles. Just memory, airbrushed by longing. You turn a corner and catch sight of faces you half remember. The neighbor who lent you salt, the old woman who swore her cat could sense sin, the boy who carved whistles from willow branches and sold them for scraps. Everyone's here. Everyone's fine. You know they're not, but dreams don't care for truth. For a moment, you think about staying. You could sit by the square, join the gossipers, pretend the world outside never broke, but the sky above the village is wrong. Too pale, too still, as if holding its breath. The laughter fades. The bells stop mid-ring. One by one, the faces turn toward you, kind, empty, waiting. You realize they aren't really looking at you. They're looking through. You wake with the taste of ash on your tongue and the faint echo of the rooster's call in your ears. The forest greets you with its indifferent quiet. Your hut still leans, the fire still smolders, and the cat sits by the doorway cleaning a paw, unimpressed with your grief. You stare into the morning light and try to recall how the baker's laugh actually sounded, but it slips away, replaced by the hiss of the wind through the trees. You almost miss the chaos, the shouting, the bells, even the fear it all meant something was happening, that you were still part of the noise of living. Now there's only the slow rhythm of breathing, of waiting, of surviving. You close your eyes and almost hope for another dream, even if it lies. Because lies, at least, sound like life. The first sound isn't birds or wind or the steady hum of your own breathing. It's voices, distant, cracked, and human. You freeze mid-step, unsure if it's real or just another echo in your skull. Then it comes again, clearer this time, singing. You haven't heard singing in weeks, not since the bells stopped, not since sound itself began to feel like a risk. You follow the noise through the trees until the forest thins and the melody swells, rolling low and strange across the open air. There, at the edge of a river, you find them. A ragged group of travelers huddled around a fire that looks one gust away from extinction. Their clothes are mismatched layers of every century, their faces lined with the geometry of hunger. But they sing anyway, voices weaving through smoke and exhaustion, turning the cold night into something almost warm. You stay hidden for a moment, listening. The song sounds like it remembers laughter. It's full of defiance and mud, and a rhythm meant to make tired feet keep moving. Then you catch the words, and they're not quite what you expected. The lyrics, as far as you can tell, are about hope, resilience, and digestive issues. You blink, wondering if your Latin's gotten rusty, or if these survivors have found poetry in the least poetic of bodily functions. Either way, they sing with conviction, as if chronic diarrhea were a noble battle. You can't help but smile. Surviving, it seems, has become its own kind of comedy. You step closer, your boots crunching softly on the frost, and the singing falters. A dozen wary eyes turn toward you, measuring threat and hunger in equal parts. You raise a hand slowly, offering the universal symbol of peace, an awkward wave. One of them, a woman with a scar across her cheek and a grin sharp enough to cut rope, gestures you forward. "If you can sing, you can stay," she says. You almost laugh but decide to hum instead. It's off-key, but they let you sit by the fire anyway. The warmth hits you like memory. You hold your hands to the flames and glance around at this patchwork family of strangers. Someone stirs a pot of questionable stew. Another sharpens a knife with absent-minded devotion. The woman who invited you hums under her breath, her voice too soft to carry but steady enough to anchor everyone else. You ask how long they've been traveling. No one knows exactly. Time, it seems, dissolved somewhere between the first cough and the last bell. They move from ruin to ruin, scavenging, singing, refusing to stop. One man says they follow the stars, another says they follow luck. The woman with the scar shrugs and says, "We follow whoever's least dead that week." You laugh, and the sound feels dangerous in your throat, like it might break something. As the fire burns lower, the song starts again. This time, you join in. You don't know the words, but it doesn't matter. The melody loops, easy to catch, impossible to forget. The rhythm works its way into your chest, syncing with your heartbeat, turning breath into chorus. When you stumble over the parts about food poisoning and divine mercy, someone claps you on the shoulder, grinning. "You'll learn it soon enough," they say. It's an anthem. You're not sure if that's comforting or terrifying. When the night deepens and the stars turn pale overhead, the group quiets. Someone passes around a flask that smells like fire and courage. You take a sip, and it scorches away the taste of loneliness you hadn't realized you were carrying. Across the flames, faces glow and fade, tired but alive, flickering like lanterns that refuse to go out. The silence that follows the song is thick, but not empty. It's full of the unspoken agreement that you all still exist, and that's miracle enough. Later, when most of them have curled up beneath cloaks and rags, you stay awake by the embers. The woman with the scar sits beside you, poking the coals with a stick. "It's not a pretty song," she says, "but pretty songs don't survive long out here." You nod. You understand now. Beauty is a luxury. Rhythm is survival. You hum quietly as the fire fades, the tune circling in your head like a heartbeat. It's crude, it's absurd, it's human. And for the first time in a long while, you feel part of something again, not a village, not a monastery, not even a plan, just a stubborn melody shared between people who refuse to stop singing, no matter how terrible the verses get. When dawn comes, the travelers pack up, their voices still raw but ready for another day. You shoulder your things and follow. The song rises again behind you, spilling into the trees like light breaking through ash. And as you hum along, grinning at the ridiculous chorus about endurance and diarrhea, you realize it doesn't matter how strange it sounds. It's a song about living, and you're still here to sing it. The first sign of civilization is not a wall or a market square, but a smell damp straw, unwashed wool, and goats. Definitely goats. You breathe it in cautiously, the way a man tastes wine he suspects is vinegar, and decide it's better than decay. The air here moves differently, thick with smoke and gossip, the language of people who've started pretending things are normal again. You walk closer, boots sinking into churned mud, and watch as the shape of a village slowly emerges from the morning haze. It isn't the same as your old one, but it could be its cousin: patched roofs, leaning fences, chickens marching with the confidence of unpaid rent collectors. Someone's hammering in the distance, trying to fix something that doesn't want fixing. You see faces, real and wary, peeking from behind shutters, measuring your distance the way you once measured plague sores. When you wave, a child waves back, then gets scolded immediately by a mother who doesn't trust strangers or fate. You can't blame her for either. You find the edge of the market square, or what's left of it. There's a woman selling turnips that look like they've been through a war, and another, bartering bundles of herbs with the zeal of someone who swears they ward off everything from demons to indigestion. A man hawks pure air bottled in jars, which is mostly just local wind and optimism. You nearly laugh, but stop yourself, unsure if that's allowed here yet. Laughter feels like a dangerous luxury, something that might spook the silence too easily. A group of men repair the well, muttering about its depth and purity, as if clean water were the line between salvation and relapse. You overhear someone say, "The sickness doesn't come this far anymore." No one corrects him. Superstition is the only science anyone's still willing to fund. You keep walking, searching for something familiar, though you don't know what that would be anymore. A smell of bread drifts from a hut, faint but real, and you stop dead. For a moment you're back in your old street, hearing the baker curse as he pulled loaves from the oven. You almost step toward the door before remembering that every ghost in your mind still wears someone else's face. You shake it off and settle for watching the steam curl from the chimney. It feels like proof that life, stubborn thing, is still happening somewhere. A man approaches older, with the shoulders of someone who's been carrying too much wood and too many losses. He squints at you, then nods toward your pack. "Traveler?" he asks. You nod. "Plague's gone from here," he says, voice too quick, like he's testing the words for cracks. You answer carefully, "For now." He studies your face, maybe waiting for a confession, then shrugs. "Good enough." He points you toward an inn, though inn is generous. It's a house with a sign that used to say something but now mostly says, "We tried." Inside, it smells of smoke, onions, and collective denial. The innkeeper eyes you as if trying to guess your story by how fast you chew. You buy a bowl of stew, mostly liquid and mystery, and eat in silence. Around you, people talk softly about crops, about rain, about how the rats aren't as bold this year. No one mentions the dead. It's a performance of peace, fragile but convincing enough to make you want to applaud. When you finish, you step back outside, the lights fading, and the goats are herded toward pens, bleating like they're reciting complaints. The air's cooler now, less heavy, almost kind. You stand there, hands shoved in your cloak, watching smoke rise in gentle curls from chimneys that survived the fire and the fear. Somewhere, a man starts singing a slow, uneven tune about saints, luck, and maybe cheese. You listen, letting it soak into your bones. You realize that civilization isn't walls or trade or the illusion of safety. It's just this, the smell of bread, the sound of voices, the clumsy persistence of people pretending the world didn't nearly end. You take a deep breath. The air still smells faintly of goats. You decide that's good enough. The child appears like a miracle that's forgotten to announce itself barefoot, dirt-streaked, grinning at you from behind a fence made of optimism and crooked wood. You stop mid-step, unsure what to do with something so small and unafraid. They stare at you with wide eyes, not the hollow kind you've learned to expect, but the bright sort that suggests the world hasn't entirely failed yet. You try to remember the last time you saw a face like that and realize it's been longer than you've wanted to count. The child asks if you're a ghost. You tell them no, though technically it's still early in the day. They nod, satisfied, and return to poking the mud with a stick, sculpting shapes only they understand. You watch in silence, caught between suspicion and something that feels uncomfortably like hope. The child hums a song you don't recognize, one that sounds too light for a world like this. You ask where they learned it. "My mum made it up," they say proudly, "so the rats don't win." You almost laugh. Almost. Their mother appears soon after, carrying a basket of laundry and the weariness of someone who hasn't stopped moving since the first bell rang months ago. She nods politely, eyes darting to your pack, to your hands, to your face, checking for signs of sickness or trouble. You nod back, the awkward salute of survivors trying not to scare each other. When she leaves, the child holds out a handful of berries they claim are definitely not poisonous. You decline politely and take out your flask instead, showing them how to mix a bit of vinegar with water. "This kills bad things," you say, trying to sound wise rather than terrified. The child sniffs it, makes a face, and declares, "It smells like feet." You can't argue with that. Still, you demonstrate how to wash their hands, scrubbing like it's a sacred ritual. They imitate you clumsily, splashing half of it on their tunic, giggling as they go. You tell them it's important, that invisible things can be dangerous. They stop laughing and squint at their palms, as if expecting to see an army of microscopic villains. "You mean like fairies?" they ask. "Exactly like fairies," you reply. That seems to make sense to them. They run off after, hands dripping, yelling to someone unseen about killing the bad fairies. You watch them go, vinegar-scented and triumphant, and something in your chest twists. You've seen towns fall, markets empty, faces vanish under cloth, but this small, unbroken spark feels more dangerous than any plague. Hope spreads faster. Later, as the sun dips and shadows stretch, you see the child again. They're chasing a goat that clearly doesn't share their enthusiasm for friendship. You call out to warn them, but the goat wins the argument quickly and decisively. The child tumbles into the dirt, laughing anyway. You can't help but join in, the sound foreign in your own throat, but real all the same. The mother looks out from her door, sees you both, and for a second, her shoulders loosen. You walk away before night, back toward the road, but something follows you, the faint echo of a tune hummed off-key, the memory of small fingers dripping vinegar, the sound of laughter unspoiled by knowledge. For the first time in a long while, you allow yourself to imagine a world that might not end entirely. It smells faintly of goats and vinegar, and somehow, it smells like tomorrow. You smell the market before you see its sweat, smoke, and the unmistakable tang of desperation wrapped in ambition. The square is back, somehow, its stalls creaking like old bones trying to remember how to stand. People gather in cautious clusters, pretending this is just another fair day, and not the tentative resurrection of human nonsense. You walk in slowly, as if the ground itself might change its mind and swallow the whole scene. There's a man shouting about miracle cures, waving a bottle filled with something that looks suspiciously like pond water and optimism. He claims it's distilled moonlight, blessed by 12 saints and a goat. A crowd forms anyway. He sells out in minutes. Next to him, a woman is offering rat-proof bread, which is just normal bread at twice the price. A few customers buy it anyway, because what's logic to people who've seen the world end twice before lunch? You pass a stall selling amulets carved from bone, another stacked with leeches for balance, and a third displaying candles labeled for purification, but smelling distinctly of fish. You realize commerce has survived because madness is lucrative. The market hums like an old song, off-key but familiar. Coins change hands again. Laughter happens again, awkward and too loud, as though it's being tested for cracks. Someone recognizes you as a traveler and waves you over to try a remedy wine, promising immunity, youth, and possibly immortality. You ask what's in it. The man beams. Everything good, he says, which, judging by the smell, includes garlic, vinegar, and guilt. You buy a cup anyway, because hope, like stupidity, is contagious. It tastes like something that could strip rust from armor, but it burns warm enough to count as living. Children dart between the stalls, chasing a dog that clearly doesn't want to be part of civilization's comeback tour. A fiddler plays a tune no one quite remembers, but people dance anyway, half out of muscle memory, half to prove they still can. The rhythm is clumsy, but it works. You find yourself tapping your foot before you realize it. The sight of motion, of trade, of life pretending to be ordinary again. It does something dangerous to your chest. There's even gossip now, vibrant and ridiculous. Someone whispers that a noble in the next town survived by sleeping in vinegar-soaked hay. Another insists that the king himself bled out half his body to balance his humors and is therefore practically immortal. Lies are the currency of relief, and they spend easily here. You buy a loaf of bread, a piece of questionable cheese, and a handful of dried apples that might once have been fresh during a previous rain. The vendor thanks you like you've given him gold, and you realize, in a way, you have. Trade is faith in disguise, the belief that someone will still be here tomorrow to sell you something equally useless. As the day fades, the market doesn't close so much as dissolve. Stalls fold down slowly. People linger in doorways, unwilling to let the noise end. You linger too, caught between exhaustion and something perilously close to joy. The smell of smoke clings to your clothes, and your pocket holds the last of your coins, warm from use. For the first time in a long while, the world feels less like a funeral and more like a terrible, wonderful negotiation. You look back once before leaving. Someone is still shouting about his miracle cure. Someone else laughing at the price, absurdity of it all. The square breathes, alive and absurd. Civilization isn't pretty, you think, but it's persistent, and somehow, that's enough. You bite into the loaf like it might bite back. The crust crackles beneath your teeth, the smell warm and alive, and for one absurd heartbeat, you forget that the world once tried to end. It's bread, actual bread, not the stale, stone-hearted thing you've been gnawing on for months, not a desperate mixture of barley dust and hope. This is golden, soft, faintly sweet. You blink, chew, and then chew again just to make sure your mouth isn't lying. It isn't. You cry a little, not enough to embarrass yourself, but enough that you have to pretend it's the steam from the oven getting in your eyes. The baker notices. He's a new one, too young to have seen the worst of it, too stubborn to let that stop him. His hands move with the speed of someone who's convinced dough can save souls. Fresh this morning, he says proudly, as if that phrase alone could restore civilization. You nod solemnly, the way one would in a temple. You want to tell him he's a priest, and this is sacrament, but instead you just buy another loaf, because holiness deserves redundancy. The market around you hums again, louder this time, more alive. The clatter of pots, the chatter of buyers, the arguments about prices, all of it feels almost human again. You watch as people hover near the bread stall, sniffing the air like dogs rediscovering faith. They don't buy much. No one quite trusts abundance yet, but they linger, and that's enough. You tear another piece from the loaf, still warm, and savor it. It tastes like sunlight, or at least the memory of it. You remember the last time you had bread like this, back before you learned how hunger changes the shape of time. The flavor hits you harder than you expect. You stand there, chewing quietly, realizing that this is what survival tastes like. Not victory or glory, but yeast and salt and the courage to bake anyway. A woman beside you sniffs. Too soft, she says, pretending not to smile. It'll spoil fast. You grin. Spoiling means time again, means tomorrow exists. You tell her that and she rolls her eyes, but she doesn't walk away. Soon, 3 more people gather, debating the merits of crusts and the right ratio of chew to crumble. It feels absurd, and it feels perfect. This is what civilization does. It argues about bread instead of death. You take your loaf and wander the edges of the market, watching traders shout over turnips and wool. The air still smells faintly of ash, but it's overpowered now by yeast and smoke, the scent of people trying. You see a boy clutching a heel of bread so tightly it's almost gone before he eats it. You almost tell him to slow down, but you don't. Some joys don't need pacing. As the sun dips, the baker pulls another batch from the oven. Steam curls into the air, carrying warmth that feels heavier than fire. You watch people drift closer, drawn by instinct more than hunger. You stand among them, loaf in hand, crumbs on your sleeve, feeling for the first time in forever that this ridiculous, ordinary thing might mean you're still alive enough to start again. It happens so fast that your brain doesn't catch up. One moment you're standing in the quiet alley behind the bakery, enjoying the rare sensation of not being immediately doomed, and the next, something soft, damp and alive, scurries across your boot. You freeze, mid-breath, mid-thought, body locked in ancient reflex. Then you look down. A rat stares back, whiskers twitching, fur slick, with the kind of confidence only creatures immune to plague possess. For a second, neither of you move. It's a duel of philosophy. You flinch first. The rat, offended, flicks its tail like you've failed some unspoken etiquette. You half expect it to bow before leaving, but it just scurries on, disappearing beneath a stack of firewood as if you weren't even worth remembering. You stare at the empty spot where it vanished, heart still hammering, and then unexpectedly, you laugh. The sound bursts out awkward and too loud, bouncing off the walls. A rat crossed your foot, and you didn't scream. You didn't panic. You just stood there, still breathing. Progress, apparently, smells faintly of mildew. You glance down at your boot. No blood, no bite. Just a smudge of dirt and a story you won't bother telling because no one would believe you cared that much. But the laugh lingers. The absurdity of it all hits you like sunlight breaking through the fog. Months ago, that same rat would have sent you running for holy water, garlic, or a priest. Now it's just Tuesday. The apocalypse has lowered your standards magnificently. A few people in the square notice your laughter and look over suspiciously. Laughter still feels contagious in the wrong way. You wave awkwardly, pretending to inspect your shoe. One woman frowns like you're tempting fate. You don't care. For the first time, the world feels less like it's hunting you and more like it's watching, curious to see what you'll do next. You wander toward the fountain, where the water's begun to flow again. A boy's chasing pigeons, shouting with the kind of joy that should be rationed. The baker's son is delivering loaves in a cart, held together by prayer. Someone's hung laundry between two houses, sheets billowing like peace treaties in the wind. The town hums not loudly, but enough. Life is making a soft comeback, tentative yet relentless, like grass pushing through stone. The rat appears again, bold as ever, this time dragging a crumb twice its size across the cobblestones. You catch yourself smiling, then mutter under your breath, "Fair enough, we all gotta eat." It pauses, as if hearing you, then continues on its way, utterly unbothered. You envy it. Rats don't think about tomorrow. They just survive it. You take a deep breath, the air sharp with smoke, bread, and something that almost resembles cleanliness. The town bell rings, not a warning this time, but a rhythm. People stop for a heartbeat, then continue what they were doing. You watch them, realizing you've become one of them again, part of the noise, the motion, the endless human insistence on continuing. You turn back toward your little rented room above the stable, the one with the draft that whistles like a ghost but keeps you dry. The rat's probably in there already, nibbling at the crumbs you drop. You decide not to chase it out. Maybe you need the company. As dusk settles, you light a candle and sit by the window, listening to the faint murmur of people below, the sound of hooves, laughter, hammers, and the distant strum of someone's lute. The rat skitters across the floor, tail flicking in the glow. You watch it, and for a fleeting moment, it feels like the universe is in on the joke that life, for all its rot and ruin, always comes back, one whisker twitch at a time. The funeral is small, the way most things are now. The churchyard looks the same as every other one you've passed in the last year, mud too soft to stand properly in, air that smells faintly of smoke and time, and a handful of people pretending they still know what words to say. The bell rings, heavy and tired, echoing down the hills as if mourning its own persistence. You stand near the back, hood up, boots sinking slowly into the ground, watching another wooden box descend into the earth like a tired secret. No one cries anymore. The tears dried up months ago, spent on brothers, mothers, neighbors, the baker's wife, the neighbor's dog. It isn't callousness, it's math. You can't cry for everyone. You've learned to conserve grief the way others hoard salt. The priest mutters something about salvation and mercy, voice breaking on the word mercy, as though it's something he's only heard, of second hand. A few heads bow, not out of reverence but out of habit. You do too. It feels polite. The wind picks up, pulling at your cloak, at the edges of the shroud, carrying with it the faintest trace of bread baking somewhere in the distance. Life doesn't pause for death anymore. It simply steps around it. The woman beside you crosses herself, lips moving soundlessly. Her hands tremble just enough to remind you that fear still exists, somewhere beneath the numbness, buried like everything else. You try to feel something sharp and real, but all that comes is a slow, dull ache that feels too familiar to name. The coffin hits the bottom with a hollow sound that used to make people flinch. Now it's just punctuation. A young man steps forward to throw the first handful of dirt. It lands softly, the way snow falls. The rest follow. You pick up a clump of earth, cold and damp, and toss it in without ceremony. It feels heavier than it should. You think about saying a prayer, but you can't remember the right one, so you just murmur the only thing that comes to mind. Stay gone. No one looks at you. Everyone's too busy pretending this is the last funeral they'll attend. You don't believe it, and neither do they. But pretending has become its own kind of faith. The priest closes his book and shuffles off, his robes streaked with mud, his eyes the color of smoke. Someone begins humming a hymn, out of tune and half remembered, and it spreads slowly, a murmur rather than a melody. You join in because silence feels worse. When it's done, the crowd scatters quickly, like birds startled by their own shadows. You linger a while, staring at the mound of dirt, waiting for something: guilt, sorrow, relief, but none of them arrive. Just a strange calm. You realize this isn't indifference, it's endurance. You've seen too much to fear what's already happened. The worst has been normalized, cataloged, filed away. You've forgotten how to fear properly. A single crow lands on the fence post nearby, cocking its head at you like it knows something you don't. You stare back, both of you unbothered by the other's presence. Eventually it flies off, black wings slicing through the gray sky. You take that as a cue and turn to leave, the ground sucking lightly at your boots as if asking you to stay. The bell rings once more, a final echo across the fields. It sounds less like mourning now, and more like rhythm, the heartbeat of a world that refuses to stop. You keep walking, not looking back. There's no point. The dead don't notice, and the living have learned not to. The rebuilding begins the way all impossible things do, quietly, with more hope than reason. The morning air carries the smell of damp straw and smoke, and the sound of hammers rings out where morning once lived. You stand in the middle of it, watching the survivors argue about whether the new thatch should face east or west, as if direction might ward off another plague. Everyone's suddenly an architect. Everyone's suddenly an expert in roofs. The houses rise slowly, patchwork things made from leftover timber, scavenged nails, and stubbornness. Children gather the smaller stones for walls, their laughter edged with the confusion of kids who've seen too much but still think everything can be fixed with enough mud. The men cut wood and shout at each other for no reason except that it feels good to be loud again. The women sew, cook, and scold all at once, because order must return in whatever form it can. You help where you can, which mostly means carrying things until someone tells you to stop. You find comfort in the rhythm of it, the thud of hammer against nail, the hiss of thatch brushed into place, the murmur of hands doing something useful. Progress smells like sweat and ash. It feels like blisters, like exhaustion you can be proud of. By midday, the gossip returns too, more durable than any building. It starts small: who's been seen hauling wood with whose husband, whose chickens survived when others didn't, and grows like ivy around every conversation. The plague may have taken half the town, but rumor never dies. You hear your name once, twice, followed by laughter that isn't cruel, just curious. You decide that's a good sign. At the well, someone tells a story about the old healer who fled into the hills and now lives among foxes. Another swears the doctor with the bird mask was seen riding north, selling miracle powders that smell suspiciously like sawdust. Everyone nods solemnly, because believing in nonsense is easier than believing in chance. Superstition builds faster than walls. By evening, the first completed house stands crooked but proud. The villagers gather around it as if it's a monument. The owner, a wiry man with more scars than teeth, stands beside his wife, both of them beaming as though they've conquered the elements. Someone brings bread. Someone else brings a jug of mead that tastes like fermented courage. You drink, cough, and keep drinking anyway. Laughter cracks open the quiet for the first time in months, and even though it sounds rusty, it's still music. The sky burns gold before giving in to dusk, and you realize the world looks almost familiar again. The roofs may lean, the fences may wobble, and the people may still flinch at every cough, but they're here. That counts for something. The cat you once befriended walks by, tail high, inspecting the reconstruction like a foreman unimpressed with the work. You tell it to mind its business. It ignores you, of course. As night settles, fires bloom across the village, glowing like stubborn stars. You sit near one, the heat on your face, the murmurs of rebuilding all around. The talk drifts toward tomorrow, planting, trading, maybe reopening the mill. The words sound fragile but sincere. You listen, and for a brief moment, it feels like the world has agreed to start over. New thatch, fewer people, same gossip. The cycle begins again. The healer's hut looks smaller now, though that might just be you being taller from surviving. The herbs hanging from the beams have turned from green to brittle brown, and the place smells like vinegar, smoke, and stubbornness. She's alive, wrinkled, unbent, with eyes that still carry that same sharp gleam of, "I told you so." You almost turn around, but she spots you before you can make a graceful retreat. "Well," she says, brushing dust off a chair that's definitely never been clean. "You're not dead. I take partial credit." You sit, because arguing with her has never worked. She moves around the room with surprising agility, poking through jars, muttering about humors and fools, and muttering again for emphasis. Her hair's gone completely gray, her hands still stained with whatever passed for medicine during the worst of it. "You've got the look of someone who's still worrying for sport," she says without looking up. "That's bad for the blood." You try to explain that it's difficult not to worry when the world still smells faintly of plague, but she waves you off. "Enough of that," she says, reaching for a dusty bottle on a shelf. "Here, drink." You hesitate, because hesitation is the only sane response to anything she offers. "It's wine," she clarifies. "The medicinal kind. You take a sip. It's awful." She beams. "See? Working already." She pours herself a cup and sits across from you, both of you framed by the quiet buzz of flies and the slow creak of wood settling. You ask if she's still healing people. "Healing?" she scoffs. "I prescribe wine and naps. Nobody's died under that regimen yet." You can't tell if she's joking, but the conviction in her voice makes you believe her anyway. She asks what you've been doing, and you tell her about the villages, the rebuilding, the bread that doesn't taste like despair anymore. She nods approvingly, but then squints at you, the way she used to when diagnosing a fever. "You still think too much," she says. "That's your sickness now. Thinking makes the blood go in circles. Better to sit, eat something warm, and let the day pass." It's absurd advice, but the kind that sounds dangerously wise after a year like this. As you talk, she moves to the hearth and stirs a pot of something aromatic, herbs, garlic, maybe onion, maybe regret. "Soup," she announces. "Good for the soul, bad for conversation." You eat in silence, and for a while the world shrinks to the crackle of the fire and the rhythm of her spoon scraping the pot. Outside, the wind moves through the fields, carrying with it the faint hum of life continuing elsewhere. When you finish, she leans back, studying you like a physician who's decided their work is done. "You'll be fine," she says. "Keep your hands clean, your belly full, and your cup never empty. The rest'll sort itself out." You laugh softly because it sounds so simple, and because maybe it is. You thank her, and she waves it away like thanks are contagious. As you leave, she calls after you. "Remember, if it hurts, it means you're alive. If it doesn't, drink more wine." The door shuts before you can reply. You stand there a moment, smiling at the absurdity of it all. For once, her advice makes perfect sense, and for the first time in years, you actually plan to follow it. You meet him on the road just after dawn, when the light is gray and the air still tastes of dew and wood smoke. He's trudging along barefoot, clothes the color of old dust, singing a hymn that doesn't quite know what key it wants to be in. A bundle of bones and brass dangles from a string around his neck, clattering with every step like a tambourine in mourning. He spots you before you can pretend not to see him, and his grin arrives first wide, toothy, and far too confident for someone so clearly unwashed. "Peace be upon you," he declares, raising a hand that looks like it's lost several arguments with dirt. You nod because peace, theoretically, sounds fine. He squints at you, as though divining your moral worth through the thickness of your eyebrows, and then beams. "You look like someone who's seen death and lived to tell of it," he says. You resist the urge to ask if he's been talking to anyone who hasn't. He tells you he's a pilgrim, bound for the shrine 3 valleys over. The Virgin Mary, he says, came to him in a dream, or possibly through a particularly strong batch of cider, and told him to carry her blessings across the land. He gestures to his necklace, a heroic tangle of trinkets, teeth, feathers, perhaps a finger bone or two. You ask where he found them. Found? He looks scandalized. They were given. You decide not to press the matter. As you walk together, you notice the lice first. They travel across his collar like explorers charting new lands. You edge slightly away, a maneuver so subtle you almost convince yourself it's accidental. He doesn't notice. Too busy recounting miracles he's personally witnessed crops sprouting overnight, the sick rising from beds, one particularly stubborn mule deciding to pray. You nod at the right moments, because disbelief takes effort, and effort feels expensive. When he talks about his mission, though, his voice softens. He says the world needs hope again, something tangible, even if it smells faintly of mildew. You glance at his relics, which jingle with misplaced conviction, and find yourself unable to disagree. After all, hope's been rationed thinner than flour lately. At midday, you share bread and water by the roadside. He insists on blessing both, performing a series of gestures so enthusiastic he nearly spills the water. You eat anyway, because sanctity doesn't improve flavor, but it doesn't ruin it either. Between mouthfuls, he tells you about the fest. Towns he's passed, some rebuilding, some abandoned, one that celebrates survival by holding weekly feasts of questionable hygiene. They dance now, he says, eyes shining, because the dead don't. You ask if he's afraid of catching what still lingers in the air, the sickness that doesn't seem to care about faith or distance. He laughs, a wild, honest sound that echoes down the empty road. Oh, I've made peace with that, he says. If death wants me, it can walk. Then he taps the side of his head. But she hasn't caught up yet. You admire the confidence, or maybe the delusion. They're hard to tell apart these days. When it's time to part ways, he presses something into your hand, a small wooden charm, rough and uneven, carved into the shape of a cross, or possibly a very tired bird. For protection, he says, or decoration. Hard to tell with holy things. You thank him, though you're not sure for what exactly. He waves once, turns toward the horizon, and continues singing off-key about salvation, lice and all. You watch him fade into the distance until he's no more than a shape moving through the light, carrying his bones, his faith, and his impossible optimism. For a moment, you envy him, not for the lice, but for the certainty that the world still listens when he prays. Then you tuck the charm into your pocket and keep walking, because maybe, just maybe, some part of you believes he's right. The summons arrives by accident, or divine comedy. A messenger mistakes your dirt-smeared tunic for the livery of someone important, or at least someone alive and available. By the time you correct him, he's already galloped off, and you're left standing there with a wax-sealed letter bearing a crest you can't pronounce. It smells faintly of rose oil and arrogance. The estate looms at the edge of the hills, larger than any building has a right to be. Its towers lean slightly, as if even stone can get, tired of nobility. You approach with the caution of someone who has learned that fancy people and bad luck often travel together. The gates creak open to reveal a courtyard that once hosted laughter and now hosts weeds. Servants, or what's left of them, scurry like ghosts, carrying buckets, brooms, and expressions of lifelong disappointment. The Lord himself appears on the steps, dressed in finery that has seen better moths. His beard looks deliberate, his eyes less so. "Ah," he says, eyeing you as if trying to decide whether you're help or hazard. "You'll do." You're not sure for what, exactly, but it's too late to decline. He gestures vaguely toward the house, muttering about loyalty, loss, and the unfortunate tendency of servants to die inconveniently. You nod solemnly, as though the universe has personally wronged you both. Your duties, it turns out, are eclectic. One moment you're sweeping the great hall, the next you're rearranging tapestries that smell like history's armpit. You polish silver that hasn't been touched since before the plague, dust portraits of ancestors who look disappointed even in death, and fetch wine for a man who insists he only drinks medicinally. You don't believe him, but you respect the commitment. The household operates in fragments. A cook who mutters prayers into every pot. A stable boy who now manages 3 horses and 12 rats. A maid who refuses to clean mirrors because the dead might look back. The Lord wanders through it all, alternately dictating orders and forgetting them, occasionally pausing to sigh at windows like someone practicing melancholy for sport. You learn quickly that nobles grieve differently. Commoners wail, pray, work harder. Lords make lists of things lost, owed again, inherited, and mismanaged. He spends afternoons reading them aloud, as if inventory might resurrect the dead. You nod through it, mostly for the bread and shelter, though the bread tastes faintly of ashes, and the shelter leaks ambition. One evening, he summons you to pour wine while he reminisces about the banquets of old. He speaks of velvet and laughter, of women who danced like secrets, of men who toasted until dawn. You glance around the dim hall, where echoes now sit in place of guests, and wonder if nostalgia can ferment too. When he raises his cup, his hand trembles slightly, spilling a red stain onto the tablecloth. He stares at it a long time before saying softly, "Even the stains used to be better." You don't answer. Some moments aren't built for words. In time, the estate begins to breathe again, in its strange, half-living way. The cook experiments with edible optimism. The maid hums in defiance of silence, and the Lord orders repairs he'll never pay for. You find yourself part of the machinery greasing hinges, hauling water, pretending nobility might be contagious if you stay long enough. But at night, when the candles burn low and the air grows still, you catch sight of the Lord walking the corridors alone, pausing at closed doors as if waiting for someone to answer. You know the look. You've worn it yourself. It's the expression of people trying to live forward while their hearts still face backward. By morning, he's all composure again, issuing orders and compliments that sound like rehearsed apologies. He hands you a coin one day, gleaming and heavy, and says, "For your service, few do their duty anymore." You thank him, bow awkwardly, and try not to think about how many ghosts it takes to make a fortune shine like that. When you finally leave, the sun catches on the estate's windows, and for a heartbeat, it looks almost alive. Behind you, the Lord's voice echoes faintly a request, a farewell, maybe a toast to no one. You don't turn back. The world's rebuilding itself one delusion at a time, and nobility, it seems, is just another way of pretending survival was grace all along. It begins, as all miracles do, with a rash and bad advice. The villager swears it started after picking turnips, which sounds plausible until you notice the distinct outline of a flea-bite constellation on his arm. He's tried everything, herbs, prayers, scraping at it with a blessed spoon, and now he's simply airing it out, arm held proudly aloft like a flag of surrender. You consider suggesting the healer's tonic, but then remember it tasted like despair and vinegar. Instead, the old dairywoman waddles over, clutching a wheel of something that could be cheese or a weaponized fungus. "Try this," she says, slicing off a wedge that smells faintly of hope gone wrong. The crowd recoils, which only strengthens her resolve. "It's aged," she adds, as though that's the same as holy. The villager shrugs because, at this point, why not? He rubs the moldy rind across the rash while everyone leans back, holding their breath, waiting for the screaming to start. It doesn't. In fact, by sunset, the rash looks less angry. The man declares himself healed, raising his arm to the heavens like a saint of questionable hygiene. The dairywoman beams triumphantly, proclaiming her cheese touched by divine grace. You're not convinced it wasn't just the mold eating the infection before it could eat him, but you keep that thought quiet. The last person who challenged divine dairy intervention was politely chased out of town with curds. By morning, word spreads faster than fleas in summer. People arrive with ailments, boils, coughs, suspicious lumps, spiritual malaise, and line up outside her cottage, clutching coins and hope. She doles out morsels of the moldy rind like communion wafers, charging extra for the truly ugly rashes. You stand in the crowd, watching the miracle multiply, and can't decide whether you're witnessing medicine or madness. The local priest arrives eventually, suspicious and hungry for control. He examines the cheese, mutters about heresy, then hesitates before pocketing a piece for further study. The healer from the next village shows up too, declaring it nonsense, until someone mentions his own wife's been coughing again. Within a week, every farmer with a moldy wheel claims to have the blessed batch, and you find yourself wondering if faith has always been this dairy-dependent. Still, the results speak for themselves, or maybe just mumble convincingly. The cheese cures more than it kills, and in these times, that's a success story. You catch yourself half believing in it, half dreading the day someone eats too much and starts glowing. When the dairy woman sets up a shrine complete with candles and a small wooden carving of Saint Brie, you laugh, but softly. The world has rebuilt stranger things on less evidence. That night, as you sit by the fire nibbling a suspiciously fragrant crust, you realize how comforting it feels to believe in something that isn't death. Maybe miracles don't need to make sense. Maybe they just need to work. You take another bite and wonder if the mold tastes a bit like mercy. It begins with music that sounds like memory, trying to remember joy. A hesitant flute, a drum that stumbles on its own rhythm, a fiddler who might be crying or laughing, hard to tell. The square is cleaner than you remember, though the cobblestones still bear scorch marks where fear once burned. Banners flap above half-empty windows, their colors too bright for a world still learning to breathe again. Someone decided this would be a festival, and no one was brave enough to disagree. You arrive late, which feels safer. The crowd isn't dense. There aren't enough people left for that, but there's enough warmth to pretend. Children chase each other in loops, shrieking with the manic energy of those too young to understand loss. Their mothers watch, smiling as though the act itself might keep them alive. The baker has reopened his stall, selling bread that's more symbolic than edible. You buy a loaf anyway, because it feels polite to participate in commerce again. When the dancing starts, no one quite remembers how. A circle forms, hesitant hands, finding other hesitant hands, feet shuffling like they've forgotten the steps. The music grows steadier, louder, desperate almost, as though it's trying to drag the world back into motion. You join in because standing still feels rude. The woman next to you laughs as she nearly trips, and you laugh too, mostly out of relief. Laughter sounds foreign at first, like an old dialect you used to speak fluently. Then someone sneezes. The entire square freezes. It's a clean, sharp sound, slicing through the music. Every eye swivels toward the offender, a young man with a red nose and the expression of someone who's accidentally summoned demons. He stammers, waves his hands, insists it's just the dust. The silence stretches so long you can hear the wind scolding everyone for daring to hope. Then the fiddler, bless him, starts again, louder this time. The drum follows, defiant. A few brave souls resume moving, as if pretending hard enough will make fear feel ridiculous. You follow their lead. After that, the rhythm catches. Feet stamp harder. The air fills with clapping, laughter, the clink of mugs meeting in shaky celebration. Someone passes you a cup of cider that tastes like courage, disguised as apples. The night grows soft around the edges, candles flickering in windows, faces lit with something dangerously close to joy. You dance badly, but so does everyone else, and mediocrity has never felt so holy. As the moon climbs, stories emerge like ghosts who've decided to linger. A woman brags that her goat survived by eating prayer beads. A man claims his chickens laid twice as many eggs once he painted crosses on their coop. You nod through it all, half listening, half drunk on the sheer absurdity of being alive. The world hasn't been cured, but it's laughing again. and that feels close enough. When the music pauses for breath, you step aside to catch yours. The air smells of sweat, smoke, and roasted onions, an intoxicating perfume of survival. Across the square, the old healer you once mocked dances with a child on her hip, her face streaked with ash and joy. The priest is singing off-key beside her, wine sloshing down his robe, his holiness melting into humanity. You realize no one's prayed aloud all evening. Maybe they don't need to. Someone starts a new tune faster, reckless, the kind of rhythm that demands motion, as if stopping would invite ghosts to reclaim the floor. You're pulled back in, spinning between strangers who grin like conspirators. The stars above seem brighter than before, though you suspect that's just the cider. Time dissolves, and for one dizzy stretch of song, there is no plague, no loss, no before, just this fragile, furious joy beating in time with the drum. When it finally ends, no one claps. Applause feels too small. People simply stand, breathing hard, smiling like fools. A child yawns, a dog howls, and the crowd laughs again, softer this time, as though testing the sound. You feel something in your chest loosen a knot you'd forgotten was there. The night air is cool, clean, almost kind. On your way home, the square behind you still hums faintly, like the echo of a heartbeat. You glance back once, half expecting the music to start again, but it doesn't. It doesn't need to. The miracle already happened. Everyone stayed, everyone danced, everyone dared to keep going. And as you walk into the dark, the rhythm lingers under your skin, steady and human, and impossibly alive. He shows up at dusk, dragging a lute that looks like it survived its own minor plague. The villagers stop mid-task hauling wood, sweeping doorways, arguing about whose goat ate whose turnip, and watch as he clears his throat with theatrical importance. You recognize him, though he's thinner, now, like life itself has been on a strict diet. The last time you saw him, his songs were about harvests and handsome knights. Now he hums a tune that sounds like a funeral learning to smile. He announces he's written new material, which is not a phrase anyone in this century trusts. Then he begins, a ballad about death and love and death again, and a surprisingly catchy chorus about washing your hands. His voice cracks on the high notes, but no one cares. You've forgotten what it's like to listen to someone perform something that isn't a prayer or a warning. Children clap. Old men nod solemnly, as if rhythm is an ancient language returning from exile. The minstrel sings of the lost, so many names you could drown in them, and somehow makes you laugh halfway through. He rhymes plague with vague, and follows it with a wink that shouldn't work, but does. His fingers fumble across the strings, sometimes finding music, sometimes chaos, but always sincerity. It's not good, exactly, but it's human. You hum along on the second chorus, off-key and unashamed. Others join in, their voices mismatched, rough around the edges, like a choir patched together from broken glass and willpower. The melody wobbles but doesn't fall. For the first time in a long while, no one looks over their shoulder for death's shadow. They look forward at the firelight, the song, the ridiculous man with his ridiculous hat. Between verses, he tells jokes that don't quite land. Something about monks, turnips, and divine punishment. You laugh anyway. Everyone does. Humor feels medicinal, even when it's terrible. Someone hands the minstrel a mug of ale, which he raises in salute to those who didn't make it, and those who did, whether by wisdom or luck or sheer stubbornness. It's the closest thing to a prayer anyone's said all evening. He plays until his fingers blister, until the stars climb high enough to look like they're listening too. By the time he finishes, no one claps. They just sit there, glowing softly in the silence his voice leaves behind. The air feels different afterward, lighter somehow, cleaner, as though the song scrubbed the village's soul. The minstrel bows, promises to return with new verses about survival, and wanders off toward the road, humming something you can't quite catch. You stand there, still humming his tune long after he's gone. It's rough and off-pitch, but it sticks to your ribs like bread. You realize that maybe this is what hope sounds like. Not perfect, not pretty, but persistent. A song that stumbles, coughs, and keeps going, just like everyone left alive. The river looks the same as it did before the world emptied out. You kneel at its edge with a bundle of laundry that smells faintly of wood smoke and human effort. And for a moment, you can almost pretend it's any ordinary morning. The water moves lazily, silver catching on sunlight like it remembers how to be beautiful. You wring out a tunic, slap it against a rock, and try not to notice how few voices join yours now. Once, this riverbank was a festival of gossip and laughter, hands scrubbing in rhythm, tongues wagging faster than the current. Now there are 4 of you, maybe 5 if the old widow downstream counts as alive today. The women talk anyway, habit wins over audience. They trade scraps of news the way others trade coins, cautiously, with inflation. Someone says the baker's wife is expecting again, and everyone goes quiet. Life still finding ways to sneak in feels almost indecent. Someone else mutters about a merchant caravan spotted on the horizon, selling salt, cloth, and stories that may or may not be true. You listen with half an ear and focus on your work. The dirt under your fingernails feels honest in a world full of pretending. When the conversation shifts to the past, you stop pretending not to listen. Names tumble out like ghosts being folded into the wash. Neighbors, cousins, people who vanished one cough at a time. Each name lands heavy, soaking through the quiet. You keep scrubbing, harder now, as if cleanliness could somehow rewrite history. The river doesn't care. It swallows everything, same as ever, carrying it away to nowhere in particular. A scrap of fabric floats past. Maybe someone's forgotten sleeve, maybe something worse. No one comments. Everyone has learned the courtesy of silence. One woman hums under her breath, some half-remembered song about spring and renewal. You want to tell her it's too early for songs like that, but the melody drifts over the water, fragile and defiant, and you can't bring yourself to ruin it. You hum too, low enough that no one notices. You glance up the hill toward the village. Smoke rises in thin, confident lines from rebuilt chimneys. The new thatch looks almost proud in the sunlight, as if unaware that the last roof looked just as hopeful before it caved under neglect. Children chase each other between houses, laughter echoing against empty walls, filling the gaps where adults can't. You wonder if they'll grow up believing this was normal life pared down to essentials, fear disguised as caution, joy measured in careful increments. The widow coughs somewhere behind you, and everyone pauses. It's instinct now, the communal flinch. She waves a hand, annoyed, insisting it's just the cold, just age, just anything but that. The moment passes, though the air never quite loosens again. You dip another tunic into the water and watch the ripples spread outward, thinking how survival isn't as loud or triumphant as you'd imagined. It's quieter, slower, a long exhale that never ends, waiting, disguised as living. When the chores are done, you linger. The others drift back toward the village, baskets on hips, shoulders bent in the universal shape of endurance. You stay by the river, feet dangling in the shallows, because moving feels like conceding something you're not ready to name. The sunlight warms your back, the wind smells faintly of wet earth, and you think dangerously that maybe this is peace. Not the kind people pray for, but the leftover kind the world gives when it's run out of better ideas. You pick up a pebble and toss it into the current, watching it vanish. You think about all the things that have vanished: people, places, versions of yourself you'll never get back. The ache that follows isn't sharp anymore. It's dull, familiar, almost companionable. You wonder if that's what healing looks like in this century. Not joy, not closure, just a quiet truce with everything you've lost. The river keeps moving, unbothered by plague, by grief, by human attempts at meaning. It glitters under the sun, beautiful and indifferent. You wash your hands one last time in its cool flow, and for a heartbeat, you almost feel clean. Not from the dirt, but from the waiting. You sit by candlelight, quill in hand, staring at the parchment like it owes you an apology. The ink glistens dark and slow, as though even it hesitates to commit to permanence. The world outside hums with a quieter kind of life. No bells, no wailing, just the faint shuffle of people remembering how to exist. You've survived plague, famine, foolish doctors, and worse advice. And yet this writing to a future that might never come feels impossibly brave or absurd, probably both. You start with the smells because they're impossible to forget. Smoke and thyme, vinegar and rot, the sharp tang of fear that clung to everything, even clean linen. You write about how the air used to carry laughter and bread, and how one day it began carrying only bells and prayers. You mention the herbs that hung in doorways, the candles that burned in windows, the constant scent of fire that was less about warmth and more about trying to scare death away. You tell them that eventually the wind smelled of nothing, emptiness has a scent too. Then you write about fear. Not the loud kind that makes people scream, but the quieter kind that makes them whisper. You describe how neighbors stopped being neighbors and became suspects, how friendship turned cautious and touch became a risk instead of comfort. You write about the silences between coughs, how each one could make a heart stop. You explain how you learned to count days by who didn't come back. You don't linger too long on that. Paper can only hold so much grief before it starts to curl. You try to lighten it with laughter, because there was laughter, strangely enough. The absurd kind that bubbles up when there's nothing else left. You tell them about the man who wore a bucket for safety, and the healer who swore garlic cured sin. You mention the priest who forgot his own sermon halfway through and decided God probably wouldn't mind improvisation. You even include the joke about the flagellants because if anyone reads this far into history, they deserve at least one terrible joke. You pause. The candle flickers like it's thinking too. The ink blots. You stare at your hands, at the lines in your skin that somehow remember every bowl scrubbed, every grave dug, every moment spent pretending to be fine. You realize you're not writing for strangers anymore. You're writing to yourself, or maybe to the version of you that still believes the world can be beautiful again. So you write about that too. About the first day the bells stopped. About how quiet sounded holy. About bread that didn't taste of despair. About children laughing like it was their first language. You tell them that hope didn't arrive all at once. It crept back like a stray cat, suspicious and hungry. That people started planting herbs again, not to ward off death, but to season dinner. That the sun came up one morning and, for the first time in years, no one questioned it. You tell them about the festivals, the awkward dancing, the bad singing, the strange new normal that didn't feel like pretending anymore. You admit that even joy felt fragile, like a borrowed cloak that could be taken back at any moment. But you also write that you wore it anyway, because that's what survival means, not victory, but stubborn participation. Your candle burns lower, the wax pooling in slow surrender. You sign the letter not with your name, but with something better. To whoever finds this, please keep going. You seal it with the last of your wax, the impression uneven but honest. You don't know if anyone will ever read it. Maybe it'll molder in some forgotten chest. Maybe it'll burn. Maybe someone centuries from now will find it, unfold the brittle paper, and recognize themselves in your words. You blow out the candle and sit in the dark for a while. The silence feels less heavy than before. Somewhere outside, an owl calls, and you imagine it as the world's way of saying, "Still here." You slip the letter beneath a loose floorboard and pat it once, like a secret shared. Then you exhale, long and steady, and let the night carry your words forward toward whoever, whenever, might need them next. It starts with a sneeze, innocent, almost cute if you weren't living in a world where sneezing could mean death. You freeze mid-motion, staring at the offending air particle like it's committed treason. The people around you pause too, that silent communal horror everyone's perfected since the plague. You wipe your nose on your sleeve, smile weakly, and say it's just the cold. You try to sound convincing. You fail spectacularly. You spend the next hour monitoring your symptoms like a scholar examining omens. You check your temperature by pressing your hand to your forehead, which tells you nothing. You sniff a clove of garlic, convinced it'll repel evil, though mostly it just makes your eyes water. You start counting the minutes between coughs, 3, then 5, then 2, and wonder if panic can make a person contagious. By nightfall, you're sweating under 3 blankets, convinced this is how it begins. You imagine the monks chanting, the bells tolling, your name whispered over bread and fear. You consider drafting your final words but realize your handwriting's terrible, and you can't think of anything poetic. Then you sneeze again, a ridiculous wet sound that breaks your own tension, and you laugh. Because if this is it, you're going out absurd. Morning arrives, and you're still alive. Disappointing, really, after all that emotional buildup. You feel tired but not dying tired, just human tired. The sun seeps through the shutters, and for the first time in weeks, it smells like spring instead of sickness. You sit up slowly, nose red, hair tangled, feeling like you've survived both death and your own stupidity. The baker's boy knocks at your door, delivering stale bread and better gossip. You ask if anyone else has the plague again, and he rolls his eyes. It's a cold, he says, as though the concept of mild illness is revolutionary. You stare at him for a long moment, then decide he might be right. You declare yourself cured and immediately demand celebration. Bathing seems appropriate, dramatic, cleansing, and vaguely scandalous. You heat a pot of water over the fire, sprinkle in herbs you barely remember the names of, and pour it into the tub like you're recreating paradise. The first touch of warmth against your skin feels divine. You sink in until the water reaches your chin, steam rising like forgiveness. For a long while, you do nothing but breathe. It's quiet, and your lungs don't burn, and that alone feels miraculous. You start laughing halfway through, the kind of laughter that comes from pure relief. It echoes against the stone walls, startling your cat, who flees as if joy itself is suspicious. You don't care. You hum a song the minstrel taught last week, off-key and fearless. You splash water everywhere. You pretend this is what normal feels like. When you finally climb out, the world seems lighter. The air outside tastes clean, and the sky looks freshly painted. You hang your laundry in the sun, unbothered by how ridiculous it is to feel triumphant about survival when it was never in doubt. But still, you survived something, even if it was only your own paranoia. Later, when neighbors stop by to check on you, you greet them with the confidence of a resurrected saint. "It was nothing," you say, voice grand, "a brief misunderstanding between me and mortality." They roll their eyes but smile anyway. One of them leaves you a small jar of honey for your health, though you suspect it's just an excuse to share the relief. That night, as the candles burn low, you stretch under your blanket, feeling clean and almost foolishly proud. The world outside is quiet again, not with fear this time, but peace. You think maybe survival doesn't always have to be dramatic. Sometimes it's just a sneeze that wasn't a sign, a bath that wasn't indulgent, and the simple, ridiculous joy of realizing you're still here. You wake to the sound before you wake to the light. The rooster crows, a throaty, self-important declaration that the world still turns, that dawn has the audacity to keep happening. For a second, you think it's a dream. You've grown used to mornings that begin in silence, the kind of stillness that once meant morning. But then it comes again louder, triumphant, slightly off-key, and your heart jolts like someone's knocked on the door of your soul. You sit up, disoriented by the ordinary. The sunlight slants through the cracks in the shutters, soft and golden instead of gray. The air carries the scent of damp earth and hay, familiar, comforting, impossibly alive. The rooster crows once more, less from duty than from arrogance. You smile despite yourself. That ridiculous bird has survived everything: famine, rats, superstition, and at least 3 half-hearted assassination attempts from villagers desperate for one more hour of sleep. Somehow, it feels like proof that the world itself has chosen not to die. You step outside, barefoot on the cool ground. The village is waking slowly, cautiously, as if everyone agreed not to believe in peace too quickly. Smoke curls from chimneys, hesitant but steady. Somewhere, a door creaks open, followed by the muted clatter of a bucket. A child laughs high, wild, startling. It cuts through the morning like sunlight through fog, and for an instant, you forget how much the world has lost. The rooster struts across the yard, chest puffed out, feathers gleaming in the light like a walking boast. You remember hating that sound once, when it meant another day of toil, another reminder that survival was an obligation, not a blessing. Now it sounds like defiance. The bird tilts its head toward you, as if waiting for acknowledgement, and you salute it. The rooster, pleased, crows again louder this time, because humility has never been its gift. The neighbors begin to appear, each looking surprised to see the others still exist. The baker waves from across the lane, his face rounder now, his hands dusted with flour. You wave back. He gestures toward his shop, mouthing something that looks like fresh bread. You nod, pretending you don't already smell it. A woman passes with a basket of herbs, muttering about blessings and balance, and you realize even superstition sounds gentle now. The cat you befriended months ago weaves between your legs, tail flicking with smug familiarity. You scoop it up, feeling its warmth, its heartbeat a soft, rhythmic insistence that everything living still matters. It purrs like a hymn. The rooster, clearly offended by the competition, crows again. You laugh aloud, the sound startling even you. It's been so long since laughter didn't come with guilt. As the morning unfolds, the village hums to life in a rhythm both new and ancient. The wheelwright hammers, the smith's forge crackles. A group of children chase one another around the well. The plague still lingers in memory, a shadow at the edge of every thought, but for once it doesn't dominate the day. People talk of crops, of rain, of gossip so trivial it feels sacred. Someone mentions holding another feast soon. Someone else says maybe the minstrel will return. It's all so ordinary you could cry. You fetch water from the well, your reflection rippling back at you. You hardly recognize yourself, leaner, older perhaps, but steadier. The scars are invisible yet permanent, stitched beneath the surface of your calm. You think of all those mornings that began with bells tolling and prayers whispered through trembling lips. You think of the silence after. Then you think of now the sound of the rooster, the laughter of children, the murmur of life returning. Survival, you realize, doesn't sound like triumph. It sounds like this. You sit on the stoop with your bread and a mug of thin ale, watching the village stretch into the day. The rooster hops onto the fence post, surveying its kingdom with idiotic majesty. It crows again loud, proud, perfectly unnecessary. You raise your mug in toast. To you, you say, and to every stubborn thing that refused to die. The sun climbs higher, painting everything in gold. The world smells of dew and ash and beginnings. For the first time in years, you don't measure the day by what's been lost. You measure it by what refuses to leave. The rooster crows again, and for once, no one curses it. People smile instead, because it means morning is real, and so are they. You stay there long after the sound fades, the warmth of the sun sinking into your skin. The cat sleeps on your lap, the village hums behind you, and somewhere beyond the hills, another rooster answers the call. The world, absurd and miraculous, insists on living, and you against every odd and omen insist on living with it. The fire crackles like it's laughing at you, which feels fair. You've done enough foolish things to earn a little mockery from the elements. You sit close, palms stretched toward the warmth, watching the flames shift between gold and red like they can't make up their minds. Your joints ache in that way that means you've lived too long to still be surprised by it. The night outside hums with insects and faraway wolves, but for once, no bells, no coughing, no fear thick enough to chew. Just you, a half-burned log, and the miracle of existing on purpose. You think back to all the ways you almost didn't make it. The fevers, the famine, the healers, with their potions of leeches and optimism. The horses that bit, the bread that broke teeth, the plague that nearly unstitched the world. You'd like to say you survived through cunning or faith or some heroic virtue, but if you're honest, it was mostly luck and stubbornness. You simply refused to die when it would have been more convenient. That counts for something, you decide, even if it's not particularly noble. The fire spits, and a spark lands on your sleeve. You brush it off without flinching. Once, that might have made you panic. Once, everything did. Now you just sigh and feed the flames another piece of wood. The smoke curls upward like a ghost stretching its arms. You wonder if the world has forgiven itself yet, or if it's still pretending not to remember what it did. The village rebuilt itself awkwardly, unevenly, but with heart. You've seen laughter return, tentative at first, then bolder. Weddings again, though no one throws rice anymore because someone decided it's bad luck. Children run barefoot through streets that used to echo with silence. Even the rooster is still around, louder than ever, utterly convinced it's divine. Life insists on itself, ridiculous and relentless. You find that comforting. You poke at the fire with a stick, the embers glowing like tiny suns. You used to think wisdom would come with age, that survival itself carried enlightenment. But mostly, it's just weariness with better posture. You've learned a few things, though. Vinegar cleans almost anything. Soup lies about how filling it is, and time does not heal so much as dull the edges until you can walk barefoot again. You've learned that grief can sit beside joy without argument, that laughter can happen in the same breath as mourning. Outside, the stars blink like they're sharing a private joke. You take a sip from your cup, wine diluted with water, the good kind, not because you're fancy, but because you finally can be. You think of all the people who didn't make it, who carried your same stubborn hope but not your same fortune. You murmur their names under your breath, quiet and steady, letting the smoke carry them upward. It's not prayer, not really, just memory, softened by time. You stretch your legs toward the fire, feeling the warmth settle deep in your bones. Tomorrow there will be chores, mending, feeding, sweeping, existing. The days no longer demand heroism. That's the mercy of it. You survived long enough to be ordinary again, to complain about weather and bread prices and that cursed rooster. There's holiness in that too, in the simplicity of complaint, in the small routines that make a world feel solid again. A breeze drifts through the open window, carrying the scent of earth after rain. You close your eyes and listen to the crackle of the fire, the whisper of the wind, the faint rhythm of your own breathing. Still here, you think, still here. It's not victory, exactly, but it's enough.